You don't walk through this lobby like you own the place. You go around. The hand came flat against his chest. Hard enough to stop forward motion. Hard enough that the cleaning cart behind him rattled, the spray bottles clinking together like loose teeth. 11:18 p.m. The Marion Tower lobby. 32 stories of glass and steel rising above uptown Charlotte, its marble floors still wet from the mop that had crossed them 2 hours earlier. The security desk lamp threw a cone of yellow light across the man blocking the service elevator. Brock Tillman, building security supervisor, 6'3", 240 pounds, ex-bouncer energy packed into a uniform shirt one size too small. The janitor he had just stopped was none of those things, late 50s, 5'10", wire frame glasses. A name patch on his left chest that read Nolan in embroidered blue thread. He held a mop handle in one hand and a photograph in his breast pocket that Brock had never bothered to notice. Brock Tillman had just put his hands on the man who owned the building, the lease, and 12% of the company that paid Brock's salary. He had no idea, and that ignorance was about to cost everyone in this lobby more than they could calculate. 2 other night shift custodians watched from the supply corridor, frozen mid-step. Neither moved. Neither spoke. They had seen this before. The lobby redirect, the chest-level hand, the voice that turned a public walkway into a checkpoint for one specific type of employee. Nolan Greer looked at the hand on his chest, then at the posted building access policy mounted behind the security desk, laminated, framed, positioned at eye level for anyone who cared to read it. All credentialed personnel may access common areas including the main lobby, service corridors, and freight elevators during assigned shift hours. The Marion Tower Access Policy, Section 3, revised January 15, 2024. He did not argue. He stepped back, took the long way around, through the loading dock, up the freight elevator, adding 9 minutes to his route. The photograph in his breast pocket pressed against his ribs. A woman in a floral dress, smiling outside a house she cleaned for 30 years. The freight elevator doors closed. In the reflection of the brushed steel, Nolan's face was perfectly still. The kind of stillness that looks like surrender, but feels like something else entirely. If you think you already know where this story is going, you are wrong. Stay with me. What happens to this janitor will shock you. 2 days earlier, a Thursday, Nolan Greer had stood in his kitchen on Beatties Ford Road in West Charlotte, ironing his janitorial uniform with the kind of care most people reserve for a job interview. Creases pressed sharp enough to cast shadows. Name patch centered. Collar points symmetrical. He ran the iron twice over each sleeve, checking the result against the overhead light before moving to the next section. The house was small. Brick ranch, 1968 construction, aluminum storm door that stuck in humid weather. Clean in the way that only deliberate people maintain. No dishes in the sink, no shoes by the door, countertops wiped to a shine that reflected the overhead fixture. One wall in the living room held framed photographs arranged in a grid so precise it looked measured. His mother Marion in various decades, always in work clothes, always smiling, always standing in front of someone else's house with a bucket or a broom or a pair of rubber gloves. One frame slightly larger than the rest. North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University diploma, class of 1991. Bachelor of Science, Business Administration. He polished his work boots with a horsehair brush, set them by the door next to his car keys. 12-year-old Honda Accord, paid off, oil changed every 3,000 miles whether it needed it or not. Before leaving the house, he opened a kitchen drawer. Inside sat a leather folder, thick with documents, held closed with a brass clasp engraved with 2 initials, MG. He did not open it, just rested his hand on the leather for a 3 count, the way someone touches a compass before walking into fog. Then he closed the drawer, locked the front door, drove to uptown on streets he had known for 40 years. The employee parking lot sat 3 blocks from the Marion Tower. Janitorial staff did not receive garage access. That privilege belonged to tenants and building management. Nolan parked in the same spot every shift, between a dumpster corral and a chain-link fence topped with razor wire. He walked the 3 blocks in polished boots and pressed uniform, passing the glass lobbies of buildings whose names he recognized from documents most people in Charlotte had never read. At the lobby entrance of the Marion, he paused. His eyes moved left, then right, then up to the roofline. A slow, deliberate scan of the perimeter that had nothing to do with weather or traffic. He checked his watch. 6:01 p.m. The same minute he entered every shift. Not approximately. Not around 6. 6:01. Precision that seemed excessive for someone whose job title was Custodial Technician 2. Inside, the lobby smelled like floor polish and money. Italian marble. Recessed lighting. A brass directory listing the building's tenants in engraved letters, the largest name consuming 3 lines. Pinnacle Capital Group. Floors, 18 to 31. Nolan signed the shift log at the security desk. Brock Tillman sat behind the monitors, feet propped on an open drawer, scrolling through his phone with the lazy focus of a man who considered surveillance a spectator sport. "Running late," Brock said without looking up. The clock read 6:01. Nolan did not respond. He signed the log, collected his supply cart from the basement staging area, and rode the service elevator to the 18th floor. The cart's wheels squeaked on the left front caster, a sound he had reported to facilities 3 times. 3 work orders submitted. 3 work orders unanswered. The 18th floor belonged to Pinnacle Capital Group, glass-walled conference rooms, standing desks with dual monitors, a kitchen with the espresso machine that cost more than Nolan's car. This was the bottom of Pinnacle's kingdom. 14 floors of financial advisory, asset management, and the particular brand of confidence that comes from moving other people's money for a living. Nolan cleaned methodically. Wastebaskets first, always counterclockwise around the floor plan, a route he had optimized over 11 months to eliminate backtracking. Then surfaces, then glass, then floors. Each task completed with the efficiency of someone who understood that systems only work when every step happens in the right order. At 8:45 p.m., he reached the executive break room on 22, the schedule posted on the supply closet door, printed by the facilities management office, said 8:45. He had cleaned this room at 8:45 every Thursday for 11 months. The intercom clicked. "Housekeeping, the executive break room is occupied. Come back after 10. Paige Kessler's voice carried the practiced sweetness of someone who had learned to make commands sound like suggestions. Executive Floor Administrative Director. 43. Blonde highlights. Controlled the elevator access cards, the break room privileges, the supply closet codes, and the unspoken social architecture of who got to exist comfortably on floors 18 through 31. Nolan looked through the glass door. 2 Pinnacle analysts sat at the far table, laptops open, takeout containers between them. They had been there since 7. They would be there past midnight. The break room was always occupied when analysts were pulling late shifts, and Paige knew this because she printed their schedules herself. He returned at 10:15. The break room was dark, empty, and now had coffee grounds deliberately scattered across the counter and floor. A full pot had been upended onto the sink, brown liquid pooling on the stainless steel and dripping to the tile below. The mess had not existed at 8:45. Someone had created it in the window between his first attempt and his return. Nolan cleaned it without comment, logged the extra 47 minutes on his shift sheet, wrote in the notes column, "Break room 22, unscheduled re-clean, spill not present during initial service window." At the night reception desk on the ground floor, a woman in her late 60s sat beneath a brass lamp that made her reading glasses glow. Odessa Carver. 31 years at this desk. She and Nolan had a quiet ritual. Every Thursday he brought her a thermos of coffee from home. Dark roast, no sugar. She kept a composition notebook beneath the desk. Marble-patterned cover, blue ink. She never explained what she wrote in it. Paige pulled that intercom trick again? Odessa accepted the thermos without ceremony, poured into her personal mug. Ceramic, chipped at the rim, printed with the words, "Still here." "Just a scheduling mix-up," Nolan said. Odessa's pen moved across the notebook page. "Third scheduling mix-up this month, all on your shifts, none on Danny Crawford's. Danny Crawford, white, same night crew, same job title, same pay grade. Never once redirected from the lobby elevator. Never once told the break room was occupied. Never once returned to find a mess that materialized from nowhere." Odessa wrote the date, the time, the details, then closed the notebook and tucked it beneath the desk where it lived between entries. In the basement locker room at the end of shift, Darren Lowell was waiting. Mid-40s, white, night shift custodian. Friendly in a way that filled every silence. Brought donuts on Fridays, remembered birthdays, asked questions about family and hobbies with the enthusiasm of someone building a file he did not know he was building. "Man, I don't know how you stay so calm when Brock pulls that lobby nonsense. I'd lose it." Darren sat on the bench, untying his work boots with the loose energy of someone who viewed the job as temporary even after 3 years. Losing it is what he wants. Nolan opened his locker, hung his uniform on the hook inside. The locker was as organized as his kitchen. Boots on the bottom shelf, jacket on the hook, a small first aid kit, and a granola bar in the door pocket. "You're a better man than me, Nolan. Seriously." Darren's smile lasted a beat too long, the way a photograph holds an expression after the feeling behind it has already changed. Nolan drove home at 12:14 a.m., parked in his driveway. Sat in the Honda for 3 full minutes with the engine off, looking at the house his mother had never seen. Then he went inside, checked the lock twice, set his alarm for 5 a.m., and went to bed. The following Tuesday, Victor Stahl arrived on the 18th floor at 9 p.m. This was unusual. Victor, director of facilities management for the building management company, was a daytime creature. 8 to 5, pressed khakis, clipboard, the kind of middle manager who believed that documentation was a substitute for competence and that authority flowed from the ability to generate paper. He carried a camera and a 2-page inspection checklist that Nolan had never seen before. "Random quality audit, new protocol from the management company. Need to inspect your assigned zones." Victor's voice carried the flat authority of someone reading from a script he had written himself. Nolan's assigned zones were floors 18 through 22, Pinnacle's territory. He had cleaned them 2 hours ago. Every surface, every wastebasket, every window ledge, every square inch of carpet vacuumed in overlapping rows that left the nap uniform under fluorescent light. Victor walked directly to a glass partition on 20. Leaned in. Studied a faint smudge, the kind of mark a fingertip leaves when someone touches glass after applying hand lotion. The kind of mark that appears on every glass surface in every office building in the country within minutes of any human being walking past it. He photographed it. 3 angles. Then wrote on his clipboard with the deliberate penmanship of someone who wanted his handwriting to look official. "Failure to maintain sanitary standard per Facility Code Section 7-12. He said it loud enough for the words to carry down the corridor, where 2 Pinnacle employees working late glanced up from their monitors. Nolan extended his hand. "May I see the checklist?" Victor hesitated, the brief stiffness of a man who had not expected the question, then handed it over. Nolan read the header aloud, his voice steady and neutral. "Facility Quality Audit Form, version 3.1. Effective date." He paused, looked at the date printed on the form, looked at Victor. "The effective date is today." "That's correct. It was implemented this morning." "This form doesn't have a revision history or an approval signature from the property management office. Standard procedure requires both before a new audit protocol takes effect." The word procedure landed in the corridor like a stone dropped into still water. Too precise, too specific. The vocabulary of someone who understood how institutional documentation worked, not someone whose daily toolkit was a mop and a bottle of glass cleaner. Victor's pen stopped moving. He recovered quickly. the professional reflex of a man who had learned to treat questions from subordinates as insubordination rather than inquiry. "I don't need your input on administrative protocols. I need you to initial here indicating you've been notified of the deficiency." He pointed to a signature line at the bottom of the form. Nolan initialed, but before handing the clipboard back, he took out his personal phone and photographed the form, front and back. The camera shutter sound was quiet. The gesture was not. "What are you doing?" Victor's voice sharpened. "Keeping a personal record. For my files." Nolan slid the phone back into his pocket. His tone had not changed. Same flat calm, same measured cadence. But something in the air between them had shifted, the way pressure changes before weather. Victor took the clipboard and left without another word. His footsteps echoed in the corridor, fast, clipped, the rhythm of a man who had expected compliance and received something he could not quite categorize. At 11:50 p.m., Nolan walked to the employee parking lot 3 blocks away. The night was cool for October, mid-50s, a thin wind carrying the smell of uptown exhaust and the distant sweetness of someone's dryer vent. Brock Tillman was waiting by the lot entrance, not on duty, not in uniform. Civilian clothes, jeans, leather jacket, the kind of boots that had steel toes for reasons that had nothing to do with workplace safety. A cigarette burned between his index and middle fingers, the ember pulsing orange in the darkness. "Heard Victor wrote you up tonight." Brock stepped away from the fence post he had been leaning against. "That's strike 1, old man. 2 more, and you're out." There was no 3 strikes policy in Nolan's employment contract. He knew this because he had read every page of that contract, twice, before signing it. A habit from another life. The kind of thoroughness that made lawyers comfortable and landlords nervous. Brock stepped closer. Close enough that Nolan could smell cigarette smoke and a cologne that cost more than a security supervisor's salary should comfortably allow. Close enough that the size difference between them became geometry rather than observation. 6 inches of height, 70 pounds of mass, the physics of intimidation calculated in bone and muscle. Just a friendly heads up. Friendly. Brock's voice dropped to the register menus when they want you to understand that friendly is a courtesy they can withdraw. Some people don't belong in certain buildings, no matter what their name patch says. Nolan looked at him, looked through him, really, the way someone examines a problem they have already solved but choose not to reveal. Then he walked past, didn't speed up, didn't slow down, got in the Honda, closed the door softly, started the engine. Brock watched the Honda pull out of the lot, took a long drag on his cigarette, flicked the butt into the gutter. He did not notice that Nolan's route home took him past the Marion Tower's front entrance, past the brass letters above the revolving door that spelled a name in Art Deco font. The Marion. The same name on the photograph in Nolan's pocket. The same name on documents in a leather folder in a kitchen drawer with a brass clasp engraved MG. At home, Nolan sat at the kitchen table. Midnight. The house was silent except for the refrigerator's hum and the distant bass of a neighbor's music. He opened the drawer, looked at the leather folder, rested his hand on it. Whatever was inside that folder could end every problem Nolan Greer had in a single phone call. But he closed the drawer instead. And that choice, that stubborn, infuriating choice, was about to cost him everything. Escalation came in layers, the way Charlotte weather shifts. Not all at once, but in pressures that build until the air itself feels heavy. And the people doing the building had no idea that the foundation they were standing on belonged to the man they were trying to bury. The Monday after Victor's inspection, Nolan arrived for his shift and found Danny Crawford, white, 26, hired 3 months ago, cleaning the 20th floor, Nolan's floor. The schedule on the basement bulletin board still listed Nolan for 18 through 22, but Danny was already half finished with 20, his cart parked in front of the conference room where Nolan always started. "Hey, man." Danny shrugged when Nolan appeared. "Victor reassigned me this morning. Said you needed help keeping up. No offense." No offense. The phrase people use when they know what they're saying is offensive and want the recipient to swallow it without complaint. Victor had not reassigned help. Victor had planted a comparison. a younger, white custodian completing the same work Nolan had done flawlessly for 11 months, creating the narrative that Nolan could not handle his zones alone. Nolan cleaned the remaining floors without comment. When he passed Danny in the corridor on 20, he noticed that Danny had skipped the window ledges, left 2 wastebaskets unemptied, and missed an entire section of carpet in the northwest conference room. No inspection form would appear on Danny Crawford's clipboard. No photograph would document his omissions. The standard was different. Everyone in the building knew it. No one was required to say it out loud. Week 3. Paige Kessler printed a memo on plain white paper, no letterhead, no authorization signature, no policy number, and circulated it to executive floor staff. Nolan found a copy taped to the inside of his supply closet door on 22. The text read, "Reminder: after-hours custodial personnel should not engage in personal conversation with Pinnacle employees. Direct all questions or concerns to facilities management." There was no such policy in Pinnacle's employee handbook. There was no such policy in the building's tenant guidelines. The memo was Paige's invention, a rule manufactured from air and authority designed to build a wall between the people who cleaned the building and the people who might witness how those cleaners were treated. That same week, Nolan experienced the memo's real purpose. 9:17 p.m. He was emptying the wastebasket in a cubicle on 21 when a young Pinnacle analyst, couldn't have been older than 25, still wearing the wide-eyed expression of someone who believed corporate culture was basically fair, approached him. "Excuse me, sir, there's a spill in conference room B coffee. Could you, when you get a chance?" She spoke carefully, the way people talk to service workers they've been taught to respect but aren't sure they're allowed to address directly anymore. "I'll take care of it," Nolan said. He was already reaching for his cart when Paige's voice materialized from the corridor behind him, sharp, cutting through the cubicle farm like a blade through paper. "Andrea." Paige did not look at Nolan. She looked at the analyst. "Did you forget the memo? Custodial questions go through the facilities portal. You don't talk to them directly." Them. Not him. Not Mr. Greer. Not the custodial staff. Them. The word hung in the air between the cubicle partitions, making the space feel smaller than its floor plan. The analyst, Andrea, flushed. "I was just asking about a spill. Log it in the portal. Response time is 24 hours. Paige turned and walked back toward her administrative station, heels clicking a rhythm that sounded less like footsteps and more like punctuation. 24 hours for a coffee spill. Nolan cleaned it anyway. 10 minutes later, after Andrea had retreated to her cubicle and the corridor was empty. He did not log the interaction. Odessa, 3 floors below, did. She had heard the intercom click when Paige keyed the system, and she wrote the time, the date, and the word "them" in blue ink in her marble-patterned notebook. By week 4, the wall had teeth. Nolan arrived for his Thursday shift and punched the supply closet access code on 22. The keypad beeped red. Access denied. He tried again. Same 6 digits he had used for 11 months. Red, red, red. The intercom clicked. Paige's voice, casual as a weather report. "Oh, codes rotated this morning. Didn't you get the email?" Nolan did not have a company email. Custodial staff communicated through a physical bulletin board in the basement locker room and a shared voicemail line that updated once per shift. Paige knew this. She had designed the communication hierarchy herself when she took the administrative director position 2 years ago. "I don't have company email," Nolan said to the intercom speaker. "Custodial staff use the basement bulletin board." "Well, maybe if your people checked more often." The intercom clicked off. Your people. 2 words that carried a weight heavier than any mop bucket. Nolan spent 40 minutes navigating the night supervisor's voicemail tree to retrieve the new code. 40 minutes of his shift, unpaid, unlogged, invisible to every metric that Victor's clipboard tracked. 40 minutes that Paige had engineered as casually as someone rearranging furniture. When Nolan finally accessed the closet and pulled his cart into the corridor on 22, Brock Tillman appeared from the stairwell door at the far end of the hallway. Not patrolling, not responding to a call, just appearing. The way he always appeared, as if the building's architecture rearranged itself to put him in Nolan's path at the most inconvenient moment. "Thought you went home." Brock walked toward him with the loose, swinging stride of a man who had spent his 20s in bar doorways deciding who got in and who got hurt. "Couldn't find the closet?" "Code was changed. I wasn't notified." Nolan positioned the cart between himself and Brock, not overtly defensive, but creating geometry that made casual physical contact harder to execute without looking deliberate. "Funny how things keep going wrong for you around here." Brock reached out and grabbed the cart handle. Not a gentle touch, a grip. His knuckles whitened around the metal. He rolled the cart backward, away from Nolan, opening the space between them. "Makes a guy wonder if the universe is trying to tell you something." "I need the cart to do my job." Nolan's voice did not change, did not rise, did not tighten. The control was almost clinical, the discipline of someone who understood that emotional response was a currency, and he was not spending it here. Brock held the cart for 3 more seconds. 3 seconds of eye contact that carried the full weight of what this was. Not a disagreement about a cleaning cart, but a demonstration of who had the power to interrupt, delay, humiliate, and obstruct without consequence. Then he released the handle with a shove that sent the cart rolling sideways, bottles rattling, the left front caster squealing against the tile. "Get to work." Brock walked past him, close enough that his shoulder clipped Nolan's arm, the kind of contact that exists in the gray space between accident and assault, where plausible deniability lives alongside bruises that nobody photographs. Nolan straightened the cart, checked the supplies, went back to work. He did not rub his arm where Brock's shoulder had connected. He did not give anyone the satisfaction of showing that it had registered. But it had registered. Every incident registered. Every shoulder check, every chest-level hand, every cart grab, every door block. Filed away in a memory that organized information the way architects organize blueprints. Structurally, precisely, with an understanding of how small forces accumulate into loads that can crack foundations. This story is just getting started. If you want to see what happens when the wrong person gets pushed too far, hit that subscribe button right now. Week 5 brought Victor Stahl back to the executive floors, this time with company. Meredith Thorne, Regional Vice President, Pinnacle Capital Group, the anchor tenant's highest-ranking officer in Charlotte. 56, silver blonde hair cut to the collar, a navy blazer that cost more than Nolan's monthly mortgage payment in 1998. Old money Charlotte, the kind of family that had streets named after them in Myers Park and opinions about everything that happened south of Trade Street. This was the first time Meredith had appeared on a custodial floor after business hours. Her presence transformed a routine inspection into something performative, a demonstration of power descending from the executive suite to examine the help. She stood in the corridor on 21, arms crossed, examining the ceiling with the theatrical disapproval of someone who had decided the verdict before viewing the evidence. "Is this the standard we're paying for?" Meredith's voice carried the acoustics of someone accustomed to conference rooms. "I can see dust on that vent cover from here." The vent cover was 9 feet above floor level. Cleaning it required a specialty extension tool with an angled head, a tool that had been part of Nolan's supply inventory until 2 weeks ago, when Victor's office removed it citing budget reallocation. The tool cost $14. See, Pinnacle Capital Group managed assets worth $3.7 billion. Victor documented the vent. 3 photographs. Clipboard notation. The file he was building grew thicker by the page. Meredith turned to Victor, not to Nolan. Her eyes moved through the space where he stood as if he were part of the architecture. "I want a full performance review on this individual by end of month. Pinnacle's brand doesn't tolerate mediocrity." She straightened the lapel of her blazer. "This building carries our name on 14 floors. It should reflect that." The building did carry a name, but it was not Pinnacle's. The brass letters above the lobby entrance read, "The Marion," named for a woman who cleaned houses. Named by the man standing 3 feet from Meredith Thorne, holding a mop. Being called "this individual" by someone who occupied his property under a lease she had apparently never read closely enough. Meredith left without looking at Nolan. Her heels clicked a retreating rhythm on the corridor tile, confident, unhurried, the gait of someone who had never been forced to take the long way around anything. After she was gone, Nolan retrieved a stepladder from a maintenance closet on 19, a closet on a floor he was not assigned to, 2 levels below his zone, behind a door marked Building Systems, authorized personnel only. He opened it with a key from a ring he carried separate from his issued set. He cleaned the vent cover in 4 minutes, using a technique that involved folding a microfiber cloth around the extension head at a specific angle, the kind of method someone develops after cleaning hundreds of buildings, not one. Darren Lowell appeared in the corridor, leaning against the wall with the practiced casualness of someone who was always nearby at interesting moments. "How'd you know about that closet? That's not even our floor." Darren's tone was light. His eyes were not. "I've been around." Nolan folded the stepladder and returned it without elaboration. The closet door locked behind him with a click that sounded, in the empty corridor, like a period at the end of a sentence. Week 6. The pressure found a new angle. Nolan arrived for his Tuesday shift to find his locker had been searched. Nothing was missing. His spare uniform still hung on the hook. His first aid kit still sat in the door pocket. His granola bar still occupied its shelf. But the arrangement was wrong. The uniform faced left instead of right. The first aid kit had been opened and reclosed with the latch on the opposite side. Someone had gone through his belongings with the careful hands of a person who wanted to look without leaving obvious marks. And had failed, because Nolan arranged his possessions the same way every time, and the smallest displacement was a signature. He said nothing. Photographed the interior with his phone, closed the locker, went to work. At 9:40 p.m., while Nolan cleaned the conference room on 20, Brock appeared again. This time he was not alone. A second security officer, Mike Petrie, younger, new hire, still learning whose orders to follow and whose to question, stood behind him. "Need to check your pockets," Brock said. He crossed his arms. Petrie shifted his weight foot to foot, clearly uncomfortable. Nolan set down the glass cleaner. "Under what policy?" "Building security protocols, random employee check. Cooperate or I write it up as non-compliance." Brock's jaw was set. The fluorescent lights caught the sheen of sweat on his forehead, the physical tell of a man who was performing for an audience of one, and the performance required escalation. Nolan emptied his pockets onto the conference table. Phone, wallet, a pen, 2 keys on a plain ring, the photograph of Marion, which he placed face down without hurry or explanation. 7 items, none of them contraband, none of them stolen, none of them anything other than the possessions of a man who carried nothing that did not serve a purpose. Brock looked at the items, picked up the phone, Nolan's personal phone, and turned it over, examining the case. This phone policy compliant? No personal devices on executive floors during shift hours. There was no such policy. Brock had invented it between the stairwell and the conference room door. "I've carried this phone on every shift for 11 months. No one has cited a policy against it because the policy doesn't exist." Nolan kept his voice even, kept his hands visible, kept his body language neutral in the way that training, a specific kind of training, the kind that teaches you to survive encounters with people who have authority and bad intent, conditions into reflex. Brock set the phone down, harder than necessary. The screen protector cracked at the corner, a hairline fracture that radiated from the point of impact like a map of minor damages that no one would ever be held accountable for. "Put your stuff away, and keep that phone out of sight on executive floors." Brock turned and walked out. Petrie followed, glancing back once with an expression that might have been apology or might have been relief. Nolan picked up the photograph of Marion, turned it face up, looked at her smile, the one that had survived poverty and exhaustion, and the quiet indignities of cleaning other people's houses for 30 years. He slid the photograph back into his breast pocket, returned the cracked phone to his pants pocket. went back to the glass partition he had been cleaning when Brock interrupted. The partition now had a new fingerprint on it, Brock's, from when he had leaned against it during the pocket check. Nolan cleaned it without comment, added 4 minutes to his shift log. That night, on 22, the break room had a new addition. A small sign, hand-printed on cardstock, taped to the coffee machine. Employees only. No custodial use. Paige's handwriting. Nolan recognized the looping Ks from her memo. He cleaned the break room. Did not touch the coffee machine, did not touch the sign. Left both exactly as he found them. But he photographed the sign, the latest addition to a growing archive on his phone that documented a pattern more clearly than any narrative could. In the freight elevator on the way down, he stood alone with the fluorescent light buzzing overhead, the photograph in his breast pocket pressed against his heart. He thought about the woman in the floral dress, about the houses she cleaned for people who could not remember her last name, about the promise he made at her bedside in the hospice on Statesville Avenue, the promise that he would never forget what honest work felt like, no matter how far his life carried him from where it started. He was keeping that promise, and it was costing him something new every week. The following Tuesday, 6 days before the trap closed, Nolan witnessed something that confirmed the architecture of what was happening to him. 10:20 p.m. He was cleaning the corridor on 19 when Danny Crawford walked past with his cart, heading for the service elevator. No rush, no urgency. A custodian finishing his shift at a normal pace. Brock Tillman stood at the elevator bank, same posture he used when he blocked Nolan, feet planted, shoulders squared, the physics of a human roadblock. Danny approached. "Night, Brock." Danny pushed the elevator call button. "Night, Danny. Good work tonight." Brock stepped aside. The elevator arrived. Danny entered. The doors closed. Total interaction. 4 seconds. No bag check. No bag. No pocket emptying. No cart audit. No demand for identification that was already clipped to Danny's belt in plain view. No hand on the chest. No shoulder clip in the corridor. No cracked phone screen. No invented policies cited in a voice designed to shrink a man in front of his colleagues. 4 seconds. Good work tonight. And the elevator door closing on a world where the same job, in the same building on the same shift, produced 2 entirely different experiences depending on the color of the person pushing the cart. Nolan returned to his corridor, finished the carpet, wiped the baseboards, did not mention what he had seen to anyone. But the observation filed itself alongside every other observation, a growing catalog of differential treatment that was building toward a weight the building's management structure was not designed to hold. Wednesday morning, 4 a.m., Nolan sat at his kitchen table and did something he had not done in 19 years of owning the Marion Tower. He pulled up the building management company's quarterly performance report on his laptop, a report filed directly to his trust administrator, Jerome Wilder, a report that Stahl Facilities Management did not know landed on the desk of the building's actual owner. He read it line by line. Staff turnover rates, tenant satisfaction scores, maintenance budgets, and a section labeled Personnel Actions that listed, among other routine entries, 3 inspection reports filed against a single employee. Nolan A. Greer, custodial technician. 2. 3 reports, 0 filed against any other custodial employee, in the same quarter. He closed the laptop, made coffee, sat with it until the mug went cold. Then he took a shower, ironed his uniform, and went back to the building that bore his mother's name to clean floors for people who did not know they were standing on his property. Week 7, Wednesday night. The trap closed. Darren was unusually animated, talking faster than normal, circling back to the same topic with the restless energy of someone working a script. "Hey, I think there's a leak in the men's room on 22. Water on the floor by the last stall. Might want to check it before it gets bad." Darren gestured toward the restroom with one hand while his other hand stayed in his pocket, fingers moving against the fabric like a man counting seconds. Nolan left his supply cart in the corridor outside Suite 2200, Meredith Thorne's office, and walked to the restroom, He checked every stall, examined every pipe fitting, ran his hand along the base of each toilet. No water, no moisture, no leak. He was kneeling beside the last stall when the restroom door opened behind him. Brock Tillman. Again. Appearing in spaces where he had no reason to be, with timing that had stopped feeling coincidental weeks ago. "What are you doing in here?" Brock leaned against the doorframe, blocking the exit. The fluorescent light overhead buzzed at a frequency that made everything in the room feel slightly wrong. Checking a reported leak. Nolan stood, wiped his hands on his work pants, maintained eye contact without challenge, the neutral gaze of someone who understood that looking away was submission and staring was provocation, and the space between the two was measured in millimeters. In a restricted restroom? This is executive floor facilities. You clean, you don't repair. Brock straightened from the doorframe and walked toward Nolan. 3 steps, each one closing distance that was already too small for the confrontation building inside it. "Darren reported a leak. I came to verify. There's no leak." Nolan moved toward the door. Brock did not step aside. Their shoulders connected, not a collision, not an accident, but the deliberate geometry of a larger man refusing to yield space to a smaller one. Nolan's shoulder hit Brock's chest and stopped. "Excuse me." Nolan's voice was flat, factual, the tone of someone requesting passage, not permission. Brock held his ground for 3 seconds. 3 seconds of chest-to-shoulder contact in a fluorescent-lit restroom on the 22nd floor of a building that belonged to the man he was blocking. Then he shifted, barely, just enough to create a gap that Nolan had to turn sideways to pass through. A gap designed to humiliate rather than accommodate. Nolan turned sideways, passed through, did not look back. He was gone for 11 minutes. When he returned, the cart sat in the same position, same spot, same angle. The spray bottles still arranged in their usual order, glass cleaner on the left hook, all-purpose center, disinfectant right. The trash bag draped over the handle the same way he always hung it. But underneath the bottom shelf, wedged between a box of trash bags and a jug of floor cleaner, there was now an object that had not been there 11 minutes ago. A Pinnacle-issued MacBook Pro in a charcoal sleeve, serial number visible through a clear window on the case. Nolan did not see it. The laptop sat below his sightline, hidden by the arrangement of supplies above it. He finished his shift, returned the cart to the basement staging area, went home. The trap was set, the clock had started, and the man who had placed it was already in the locker room, untying his boots, whistling softly, waiting for Thursday. Thursday arrived with the mechanical certainty of institutional process. 8:15 p.m. Nolan had been on shift for 2 hours. Floors 18 and 19 were done. He was rolling the cart toward the service elevator when Victor Stahl appeared from the stairwell, clipboard in hand, camera around his neck, followed by Paige Kessler and, 3 steps behind, arms crossed like a man waiting for a starting gun, Brock Tillman. 3 of them, arriving together. At 8:15 on a Thursday evening when Victor should have been home, Paige should have been off duty, and Brock should have been at the security desk monitoring cameras that he rarely bothered to watch. Routine supply cart audit. New protocol. Victor's voice carried the same flat tone as the inspection 3 weeks ago, but his eyes moved to the bottom shelf of Nolan's cart with a directness that eliminated any pretense of routine. He reached underneath. His hand traveled in a straight line. No searching, no fumbling, no moment of discovery. The geometry was precise, right hand, under the shelf, between the trash bags and the floor cleaner, fingers closing around the laptop sleeve. He pulled it out the way someone retrieves an object from a location they have memorized. Well, Victor held the laptop up. The Pinnacle logo caught the corridor light. What do we have here? Paige's hand went to her mouth, a gesture so rehearsed it might as well have come with stage directions. That's Meredith's laptop, the one reported stolen this morning. Her voice scaled upward with manufactured shock. Are you kidding me? Nolan looked at the laptop, looked at Victor, looked at the path Victor's hand had taken, Straight line, no hesitation, no exploration. The geometry of a man reaching for something he already knew was there. "I've never seen that device before," Nolan said. His voice was level, controlled, absent of the panic they expected and needed. Brock stepped forward. Close. The size differential activated like a switch, his shoulder blocking the corridor, his body language converting a hallway into a cage. "Save it for HR, pal." His hand found Nolan's shoulder and squeezed, hard enough to dimple the fabric, hard enough that the pressure registered in the small muscles around Nolan's collarbone. Not a shove, not a strike. A grip that said, "I can do worse, and we both know it." Nolan did not pull away, did not flinch. He held Brock's gaze the way someone holds a position they have decided not to surrender. Not from stubbornness, but from the particular calm of a person who has evaluated every possible outcome and accepted each one. Victor was already on his phone. The call connected on the second ring. "Miss Thorne? Victor Stahl. We've located your laptop. It was found on the custodial cart assigned to Nolan Greer." A pause. "Yes, on his cart, concealed under the bottom shelf." Another pause. "Understood. We'll bring him up." The call lasted 41 seconds. Meredith Thorne answered at 8:17 p.m. on a Thursday evening, not at home, not away from her desk, but available. Instantly, as if she had been waiting by the phone, as if the timing of this call had been arranged in advance, the way a meeting gets blocked on a calendar. Conference room on 18, the room where Pinnacle's junior analysts practiced presentations and where, tonight, a different kind of performance was taking place. Meredith sat at the head of the table, navy blazer, reading glasses perched on her nose, a folder in front of her, thick, tabbed, the accumulated product of 8 weeks of fabricated inspection reports, manufactured deficiencies, and a timeline that pointed in one direction with the inevitability of gravity. Victor sat to her right. Paige stood near the door. Brock filled the doorway behind Nolan like a wall with a pulse. "Mr. Greer?" Meredith did not stand, did not offer a seat, did not extend the basic courtesies that people in positions of power extend to other human beings when they still consider them human. "Effective immediately, your contract with Stahl Facilities Management is terminated for cause." She opened the folder, read from the top page with the clipped efficiency of someone who had rehearsed this moment. "Grounds: theft of company property, specifically a Pinnacle-issued MacBook Pro, serial number MK7419 Delta, valued at $2,349. Repeated performance deficiencies, as documented in facilities. Inspection reports dated September 24th, October 8th, and October 22nd. And violation of building security protocols." She slid a single sheet of paper across the table. Termination letter. Pre-printed. Formatted. A line at the bottom for his signature acknowledging receipt. Nolan picked up the letter. Read every word. His eyes stopped on the second line. "This letter is dated yesterday." He set the paper down, looked at Meredith. "You printed a termination letter before the laptop was found." The room contracted. Victor shifted in his chair, a small movement, but Nolan registered it the way a compass registers magnetic north. Paige's manufactured expression flickered. Brock's breathing changed behind him. Meredith's jaw tightened. A micro-expression, there and gone in under a second, but it confirmed everything the date on the letter already proved. "The date is a clerical error. Sign the acknowledgement." Her voice was steel wrapped in silk. "I'm not signing anything." The sentence fell into the room like a dropped blade. 4 people on one side of a table, one on the other. 4 people with institutional authority, fabricated evidence, and a narrative already written. One man with a mop cart, a photograph, and the kind of calm that people mistake for weakness until they discover what it actually costs to maintain. Meredith removed her reading glasses, folded them with precision, set them on the table like someone holstering a weapon. "Brock, please escort Mr. Greer from the building. He has 15 minutes to collect his personal belongings from his locker." Brock's hand landed on Nolan's shoulder again. The same grip, the same pressure, the same message. But this time he pulled, a sideways yank that rotated Nolan toward the door with the casual force of a man moving furniture. Nolan pulled his shoulder free. Not violently, not with the aggression they were hoping he would display so they could add combative behavior to the termination file. He simply stepped forward, outside the radius of Brock's reach, and turned under his own power. Hands off. 2 words. Quiet. Absolute. Brock's face darkened. He was not accustomed to those 2 words. Not from a janitor, not from anyone who did not outrank him, outsize him, or outearned him. And in Brock's calculation, Nolan qualified on none of those counts. He grabbed Nolan's arm, full grip this time, fingers closing around the bicep with the practiced pressure of someone who had spent years learning exactly how hard to squeeze before it left marks that lasted past a shift change. Nolan stopped walking, looked down at the hand on his arm, looked up at Brock. The eye contact lasted 4 seconds, long enough to communicate something that words would have diluted. Then he spoke, his voice carrying the flat, measured tone of a man reciting coordinates. "You are touching me without my consent. You are not law enforcement. You do not have legal authority to use physical force during an employment separation. I am asking you, once, to remove your hand." The conference room went still. Meredith's pen stopped moving. Victor's chair creaked as he shifted. Page's lips parted, then closed. The words were not emotional. They were procedural, technical. The language of someone who understood exactly where the line was between lawful escort and unlawful battery, and had just placed a marker on it. Brock released his arm, slowly. His fingers uncurled one at a time, the way a man releases something he does not want to admit he was holding. 15 minutes, Meredith repeated from behind the table, her voice thinner now, stripped of the silk that usually wrapped her steel. In the basement locker room, Nolan collected his belongings with the same methodical precision he applied to everything. Spare uniform, folded, not crumpled. First aid kit, granola bar. He placed each item into a plastic grocery bag with the care of someone packing evidence rather than possessions. Brock stood in the doorway, arms folded, watching. Mike Petrie hovered behind him, the second security officer, the one who shifted weight from foot to foot and would not meet Nolan's eyes. "Time's up." Brock checked his watch with theatrical deliberation. 7 minutes had passed, not 15. Nolan closed the locker, did not argue the time, did not point out that 8 minutes of the promised 15 still remained. He had learned, over 8 months, over 14 documented incidents, over a lifetime of navigating spaces where the rules changed depending on who was standing in them, that arguing with people who controlled your access to a building was a luxury that dignity could not afford. The walk through the lobby took 67 seconds. Nolan had counted steps in this lobby before, part of the route optimization, part of the way he understood spaces. 72 steps from the elevator bank to the revolving door. Tonight, with Brock 1 pace behind him and 2 night shift custodians frozen mid-task against the far wall, it was 72 steps through a silence thick enough to taste. Odessa Carver looked up from the reception desk. Her pen hovered over the notebook. Her eyes tracked the scene. Nolan in front, Brock behind, the body language of escort that was 1 degree of force away from arrest. She wrote the time, 9:22 p.m. Then she wrote the rest. Nolan Greer escorted from building by Brock Tillman. Mr. Greer carrying personal belongings in plastic bag. No verbal exchange during escort. Tillman walked within 18 inches of Mr. Greer's back, closer than standard escort distance, closer than professional conduct requires. The 2 night shift custodians, Danny Crawford and a newer hire named Marcus Webb, stood against the far wall near the supply corridor entrance. Marcus held a dustpan in one hand, motionless, the way people freeze when they witness something they know is wrong, but lack the position to challenge. Danny leaned against the wall with his arms crossed. His expression was difficult to read. Not concern, not satisfaction, but something in between. The face of a man watching a plan unfold that he had participated in, but could not fully claim. At the security desk, Brock held out his hand, palm up, waiting. Nolan unclipped his building access badge from his belt, removed the parking lot credential from his wallet, took the supply closet master key from his ring, and set it on the desk beside the other items. 3 pieces of access, 11 months of work, surrendered on a desk that Nolan had cleaned every Tuesday and Thursday for nearly a year. At the revolving door, Nolan paused, reached into his breast pocket, took out the photograph of Marion, the same photograph from the first night, from every night. A woman in a floral dress, smiling in front of a house she cleaned for someone who never learned her middle name. He looked at the photograph the way people look at anchors when the current is pulling them somewhere they don't want to go. Then he tucked it back into his coat, adjusted his collar, walked through the revolving door into the Charlotte night. "Doors that way, old man." Brock's voice followed him through the glass. "Don't let it hit you." Nolan Greer walked out of the Marion Tower at 9:27 p.m., carrying nothing but his coat and a photograph of the woman who gave the building its name. No one in that lobby knew that. Not Brock, who was already texting Meredith a confirmation. Not Paige, who was already drafting a memo about the supply closet code change. Not Victor, who was already filing the termination paperwork with a date he would quietly correct to today. Not Darren, who was mopping the basement corridor with headphones on, humming a song that sounded almost cheerful. None of them knew. But they were all about to find out. Friday morning, 7 a.m. The doorbell rang at the Brick Ranch on Beatty's Ford Road. Nolan opened the door in house clothes, gray sweatpants, a worn NCA and T sweatshirt, house slippers that had seen better decades. He had been up since 4, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that went cold 2 hours ago. Odessa Carver stood on the porch, wool coat over her night shift uniform, reading glasses on a beaded chain around her neck. Under her arm, the marble-patterned composition notebook. She had never been to his house before. In 11 years of thermoses and Thursday night conversations, the boundary between work and home had held. She was crossing it now because boundaries stop mattering when you watch someone get walked out of a building they've served for more than a decade. "I've been keeping this for 8 months. She held up the notebook. "Every incident, every date, every name, every word I heard them say when they thought nobody was listening at the front desk." Nolan stepped aside, let her in, made fresh coffee. The real kind, dark roast, French press, the same blend he brought her in the thermos. They sat at the kitchen table. The leather folder sat in the drawer 6 inches from Odessa's elbow. She did not know it was there. She opened the notebook to the first flagged entry. Blue ink, careful handwriting, the penmanship of a woman who had worked reception desks for 3 decades and understood that what gets written down becomes real in ways that what gets spoken does not. Entry 1, June 12, 2024, 8:51 p.m. Odessa read with the steady pace of someone who had been waiting for an audience. Brock Tillman physically blocked Nolan Greer from using the main lobby elevator, placed his hand flat against Mr. Greer's chest, told him, and I'm quoting exactly, "Service entrance is around back where you belong." Witnessed by night custodian Darren Lowell and myself, Odessa Carver, night reception desk. She turned the page. Entry 4, July 23, 2024, 10:07 p.m. Brock Tillman conducted an unannounced search of Nolan Greer's supply cart during floor change transition on 18. No other custodial staff were searched. Tillman provided no explanation when asked by Mr. Greer. Tillman's response, quote, "I don't need a reason, I'm security," end quote. Another page. Entry 7, August 9, 2024, 9:05 p.m. Paige Kessler changed the supply closet access code on floor 22 without notifying custodial staff. When Nolan Greer requested the new code via intercom, Kessler responded, and I am quoting her exact words, "Maybe if your people checked your emails." Custodial staff do not have company email accounts. This fact is documented in the Employee Onboarding Manual, page 14, which Kessler signed as administrative director during its most recent revision. She had flagged 14 entries, each one dated, each one timed to the minute, each one naming the perpetrator, quoting their words, identifying witnesses. The notebook was not a diary. It was a deposition waiting to happen. Entry 9, September 3rd, 2024, 10:32 p.m. Odessa turned the page. Brock Tillman conducted an unscheduled search of Nolan Greer's supply cart on floor 20. Cart contents emptied onto the corridor floor. Cleaning solutions, trash bags, paper towels, and personal items, including a framed photograph, were placed on the floor and not returned to the cart. Mr. Greer was required to reload the cart himself. No contraband was found. No incident report was filed. No other custodial staff carts were searched. Witnessed by Mike Petrie, second shift security officer, who appeared visibly uncomfortable during the search. Entry 10, September 17, 2024, 8:03 p.m. Paige Kessler instructed building receptionist, that's me, to document the arrival and departure times of custodial staff on a separate log not shared with other employees. When I asked why, Kessler stated, quote, "We need to track their movements more carefully, especially his." She did not specify a name. She gestured toward the service elevator, where Nolan Greer was the only custodial worker entering the building at that time. Entry 12, October 3rd, 2024, 9:14 p.m. Victor Stahl conducted second unannounced inspection of Nolan Greer's assigned zones on floors 18 through 22. No other custodial staff were inspected during this visit or during the previous inspection on September 24th. Stahl was accompanied by Meredith Thorne, Regional Vice President, Pinnacle Capital Group. Ms. Thorne referred to Nolan Greer as, quote, "this individual," end quote, and did not address him directly at any point during the encounter. Entry 13, October 15, 2024, 9:51 p.m. Brock Tillman physically grabbed Nolan Greer's arm during a personal property search on floor 20. Mr. Greer instructed Tillman to remove his hand. Tillman complied after approximately 4 seconds. No other custodial employee has been subjected to personal property searches during my 31 years at this desk. The search appeared coordinated. Tillman arrived with Second Officer Mike Petrie, suggesting premeditation rather than routine security activity, and then the entry that drew a line under everything. Entry 14, October 23rd, 2024, 7:40 p.m. Odessa's voice slowed. Darren Lowell asked Nolan Greer to investigate a reported plumbing leak in the men's restroom on floor 22. Mr. Greer left his supply cart unattended in the corridor outside Suite 2200 for approximately 11 minutes. No plumbing leak was found. The following evening, October 24th, a Pinnacle-issued laptop was discovered on Mr. Greer's cart by Victor Stahl during what was described as a routine supply cart audit. Mr. Stahl reached directly to the bottom shelf without searching any other area of the cart. He appeared to know the laptop's location prior to reaching for it. She closed the notebook, placed both hands flat on the kitchen table. 14 entries, 8 months, 1 target. She looked at Nolan the way someone looks at a question they have been carrying too long. Coincidence requires a lot of imagination, Mr. Greer. There it was again. Mr. Greer. Not Nolan, not buddy, not pal, not old man. Mr. Greer, spoken with the weight of someone who had watched this man for over a decade and understood, without being able to name it, that the distance between who he appeared to be and who he actually was could fill an ocean. You treat that building like it belongs to you, Odessa said, like you're personally responsible for every floor, every corridor, every piece of glass. In 31 years, I've never seen a janitor act like that. I've seen executives act like that. Owners, people whose names are on the deed, but never a janitor. Nolan poured her more coffee, set the mug down without trembling, without hesitation, without any external sign that the woman sitting at his kitchen table had just walked closer to the truth than anyone in 11 years. I appreciate you keeping this record, Odessa. His voice was steady. More than you know. She watched him for a long moment. Then she nodded. Not the nod of someone who has received an answer, but the nod of someone who has decided to stop asking and start trusting instead. What are you going to do? She asked. Nolan looked at the kitchen drawer. 6 inches from Odessa's elbow. Brass clasp. Initials M.G. "What I should have done weeks ago," he said. Monday morning, 9:14 a.m. 14A. Nolan Greer walked into the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission Charlotte District Office on East 4th Street. He wore a pressed shirt, dark slacks, and the kind of quiet composure that intake officers learn to recognize as either shock or deep resolve. He filed a formal charge of discrimination under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, 42 U.S.C. Section 2000E. The charge named Stall Facilities Management, LLC, as the respondent. The intake form took 40 minutes to complete. Charge number 846-2024-03179. Charging party, Nolan A. Greer. Basis, race, color. Date of most recent discriminatory act, October 24, 2024. Nature of charge, hostile work environment, disparate treatment, wrongful termination, and retaliatory fabrication of theft allegations. The EEOC investigator, Tanya Briggs, 12 years with the agency, reading glasses pushed up into short natural hair, reviewed Nolan's documentation with the methodical attention of someone who had seen 1,000 cases and could sort the legitimate from the frivolous within the first 3 pages. She spent 11 minutes on Odessa's notebook, read every entry, examined the handwriting for consistency, noted the dates, the times, the witnesses named. When she finished, she looked at Nolan over the rim of her glasses. This is a well-documented pattern. Her voice was professional, neutral, the tone of someone who cannot express opinion but whose eyebrows do the work instead. The respondent has 30 days to provide a position statement. Our investigation will proceed from there. Estimated timeline for resolution is 6 to 10 months. Mediation is available if both parties consent, but it's not required. 6 to 10 months. Nolan absorbed the number the way he absorbed everything, with patience that looked passive and was anything but. He walked out of the EEOC office into a Charlotte morning that felt different from every Charlotte morning he had experienced for the past 11 months. No shift to prepare for, no uniform to iron, no Honda parked 3 blocks from a building that bore his mother's name. The routine that had structured his weeks, the same routine that had exposed him to Brock's hands and Paige's intercom and Victor's fabricated inspections, was gone. And without it, the days stretched in a way that felt less like freedom and more like exile. He drove past the Marion Tower on the way home, did not stop, did not slow down, but he looked. 32 stories of glass reflecting the morning sun, the brass letters above the entrance catching light the way they always did. His building, his mother's name, occupied by people who had walked him out of it like a shoplifter. At home, he followed the only routine he had left. Made coffee, read the news, sat in the chair where his mother used to sit when she came home from cleaning other people's houses. Bone-tired, hands rough from chemicals, but always changing out of her work clothes before she sat down, because she believed that the dignity of rest required a separation from the labor that earned it. He sat in that chair and understood, for the first time in a way he could feel in his chest, what it had cost her to maintain that dignity every day for 30 years. "The fabricated theft allegation," he said. "The laptop found on my cart. I want that addressed specifically." Tanya Briggs made a note. If the theft allegation was manufactured as a pretext for termination, that falls under retaliatory discharge. We'll examine the timeline, specifically the date on the termination letter versus the date the laptop was reportedly discovered. You mentioned the letter was dated October 23rd. The laptop was found on October 24th. Correct. The termination letter was printed before the alleged theft was discovered. Briggs underlined something in her notes. We'll request their position statement address that discrepancy directly. Nolan thanked her, stood, walked out of the EEOC office into the Charlotte morning, where the October sun was doing what Charlotte sun does in autumn, warming the concrete without warming the air, making everything bright without making anything comfortable. He sat in his Honda in the parking lot for 11 minutes. The charge number repeated in his mind with the rhythm of something that now existed as more than memory. It was filed, documented, assigned a number, part of the federal record. Whatever happened next, the pattern was no longer invisible. Someone with authority and investigative resources would now examine what Brock and Page and Victor and Meredith had built, not as isolated incidents, but as a system designed to make one man's employment untenable while leaving every other custodian on the same shift untouched. He drove home, made a sandwich he did not eat, sat at the kitchen table as the afternoon light moved across the floor, tracking the hours the way his mother used to track drying laundry, by the angle of the sun through a window. At 3:15 p.m. his phone rang. Unknown number, Charlotte area code. Mr. Greer, this is Lisa Hendricks, Human Resources Director at Stall Facilities Management. I'm calling regarding your separation. We understand you may have concerns about the termination process, and we'd like to offer you an opportunity to resolve this informally. Resolve informally, 3-month severance, a neutral reference letter, signature on a release of claims that would make the EEOC charge disappear and Odessa's notebook irrelevant, a quiet burial of everything that had happened, wrapped in language designed to sound generous while eliminating accountability. I've filed a charge with the EEOC, Nolan said. Any further communication should go through that process. Silence on the line. 5 seconds. Then, Mr. Greer, I'd encourage you to reconsider. These situations rarely go the way employees hope. The process is long. The burden of proof is on the charging party, and frankly, at-will employment in North Carolina makes these cases extremely difficult to sustain. I understand the burden of proof. Nolan's voice did not waver. I also understand what the EEOC looks for when a termination letter is dated before the alleged cause for termination occurs. Have a good afternoon, Ms. Hendricks. He ended the call. Set the phone on the table next to the sandwich he had not eaten. Then he opened the kitchen drawer. The leather folder sat there. Brass clasp. Initials M.G. 40 years compressed into pages that could rearrange the power dynamics of an entire building in the time it took to read them aloud. Not yet. Not until the people who had built this machine of humiliation understood, fully, completely, exactly who they had chosen to target. He closed the drawer. Again. This is the moment everything changes. If you're still here, hit that like button, because what Nolan Greer does next will shake that building to its foundation. Thursday of the same week. Nolan received a certified letter at his home address. Return address, Hargrove & Associates, attorneys at law, representing Stall Facilities Management, LLC. He opened it at the kitchen table, read it twice, set it down next to his cold coffee. The letter stated, Dear Mr. Greer, this letter serves as formal notice that your termination was conducted in accordance with the terms of your at-will employment agreement and applicable North Carolina employment law. The company denies any and all allegations of discrimination, retaliation, or wrongful conduct. Your employment was at will, and the company exercised its lawful right to terminate the employment relationship for documented cause. Any further communication regarding this matter should be directed exclusively to our counsel at the address above. At-will employment, 2 words that meant an employer could end a job for any reason or no reason, as long as that reason was not illegal. The burden of proving it was illegal fell entirely on the person who had lost the job, the income, the dignity, and, in Nolan's case, the right to walk through the lobby of a building that bore his mother's name. He read the letter one more time. Then he opened the kitchen drawer, took out the leather folder with the brass clasp, set it on the table next to the lawyer's letter. 2 documents. 2 realities, one visible, one hidden. He opened the clasp. Inside, a trust deed, a master lease agreement, an investor disclosure filing, financial statements, a will, a letter from his mother, handwritten, dated the year she died. Documents that represented 40 years of work, sacrifice, and the particular American miracle of a woman who cleaned houses and a son who built them. He picked up his phone, scrolled to a contact he had not called in 3 months. Jerome Wilder, attorney, trust administrator, the only person besides Nolan who knew every page in this folder. The call connected on the second ring. "Jerome, it's Nolan." He looked at the lawyer's letter on the table, looked at the trust deed beside it. "It's time." A pause on the other end. Not surprise. Jerome Wilder had been Nolan's attorney for 23 years and had asked the same question at least once a quarter for the past 11 months. "Are you sure you want to keep doing this? Are you sure this experiment needs to continue?" The answer had always been the same. "Not yet. My mother worked her whole life without anyone knowing her worth. I want to understand what she felt. I want to understand the building from every level, not just the one where people sign checks." But now the answer had changed. "What happened?" Jerome's voice carried the careful neutral tone of a trust and estates lawyer who had learned to let clients arrive at their own pace. "They fired me, planted a stolen laptop on my cart, fabricated 8 weeks of inspection reports, backdated the termination letter, and the security supervisor has been putting his hands on me since June." Another pause, shorter this time. The sound of Jerome processing, not the facts, which were straightforward, but the magnitude of what responding to those facts would require. Revealing Nolan's identity meant detonating a controlled charge under the largest tenant in the Marion Tower. It meant exposing a trust arrangement that had been private for 21 years. It meant turning a janitor's wrongful termination into a corporate governance crisis that would reach Pinnacle's board of directors, their investors, their legal team, and every regulatory body that oversees commercial lease agreements in Mecklenburg County. "I'll need 72 hours to prepare the documentation," Jerome said. "Trust deed, lease agreement, specifically Section 14B, the investor disclosure filing. I'll want everything authenticated and notarized before we walk in. I've also filed an EEOC charge, and I have an external witness. A woman at the reception desk kept a handwritten log of every incident, 14 entries over 8 months. Notarize that log. I want it in the file before we sit down with anyone." "Jerome," Nolan's voice softened. "The building, the name above the door. Make sure they understand where it came from. Make sure they know who Marion Greer was." "They'll know," Jerome said. "When I'm done, they'll know." The call ended. Nolan set the phone down, sat alone at his kitchen table in the house his mother never saw, surrounded by photographs of a woman who cleaned floors for 3 decades so her son could own them. He sat there until the light changed from afternoon to evening, until the shadows on the kitchen floor stretched and merged and disappeared into general darkness. Then he stood, opened the refrigerator, finally ate the sandwich. 2 words, spoken quietly, in a kitchen on Beatty's Ford Road. 2 words that would travel from this kitchen to a conference room on the 18th floor of a building called the Marion, where they would land with the force of a verdict that Meredith Thorne, Brock Tillman, Victor Stahl, Paige Kessler, and Darren Lowell had never imagined and could not outrun. 2 words, "It's time." But Nolan did not yet know what Jerome would find when he started pulling threads. Did not know that the email server at Pinnacle Capital Group contained a message, sent at 3:51 p.m. on October 23rd, from Paige Kessler to Victor Stahl, subject line, "Tonight," that would prove the laptop plant was not improvised but orchestrated. Did not know that the building management company's security camera footage from the corridor outside Suite 2200 had been overwritten under the standard 14-day retention policy, conveniently erasing the only visual record of who had accessed Nolan's cart during those 11 minutes. Did not know that the laptop's own metadata would tell a story its planters had not bothered to edit. He did not know any of this yet, but Jerome Wilder was about to find out. And when he did, he was going to walk into Pinnacle Capital Group's Charlotte office carrying 3 documents that would turn Meredith Thorne's world inside out. Because the man she fired for stealing a laptop was the man who owned her office, her floor, her building, and 12.3% of the company that employed her. And Section 14B of her lease, the clause she had never read, buried on page 31 of a 44-page agreement, was about to become the most important sentence in her career. The Marion Tower stood against the Charlotte skyline, 32 stories of glass and steel reflecting the late October sun. Inside, Pinnacle's analysts typed at standing desks. Page updated the supply closet codes. Victor filed his inspection reports. Brock sat at the security desk, feet on the drawer, scrolling through his phone. None of them looked up. None of them felt the shift. None of them understood that the building beneath their feet had just been reclaimed by the man they had thrown out of it, quietly, legally, and with the kind of patience that only comes from a lifetime of being underestimated. The game was not over. It was just beginning. And the next move belonged to Nolan Greer. Meanwhile, in the basement locker room of the Marion Tower, Darren Lowell sat on the bench where he and Nolan had talked after every shift for 11 months. He untied his boots, set them in his locker, pulled out his phone and typed a text message to a number saved under the name V. No last name, no contact photo, just a single initial that kept the connection deniable. Done. He's out. No issues. Send. The response came in 9 seconds. Good. Delete this thread. Delete. Darren deleted the thread, closed his locker, walked out of the building where he had pretended to be a friend to the man who owned it, past the reception desk where Odessa Carver watched him leave without saying goodnight, into a parking lot where the space next to his truck, the space where Nolan's Honda had sat every shift for nearly a year, was empty. He did not look at the empty space. He did not think about the thermos of coffee Nolan had brought Odessa every Thursday. He did not think about the photograph in the breast pocket, or the boots polished to a shine, or the 11 minutes he had manufactured with a fictional leak so that a laptop could be planted on a supply cart by hands that were not his, but served the same purpose. He drove home, and if his hands shook on the steering wheel, there was no one in the truck to witness it. 3 blocks away, the Marion Tower held its ground against the Charlotte night. 32 stories. 1 name. A brass dedication plaque in the lobby that no one in the building had bothered to read since the day it was mounted. A plaque that said, in letters small enough to require stopping and leaning close, for Marion A. Greer, who taught her son that every floor deserves the same care, whether you're building it or cleaning it. NAG, 2003. NAG. Nolan Augustus Greer, the janitor, the owner, the man they never bothered to see. The lobby lights dimmed on their automatic timer. The building settled into its nighttime hum. HVAC system cycling, elevators parking on the ground floor, security cameras recording empty corridors where a man with a mop cart had worked in silence for 11 months, keeping a promise to a woman whose name was etched in steel above the door. The promise was not broken, the patience was not wasted, and the reckoning, slow, methodical, built on documentation and trust deeds and a morality clause on page 31, was 72 hours away. Jerome Wilder spent the next 72 hours the way he had spent every critical phase of his 23-year relationship with Nolan Greer, methodically, precisely, and without a single wasted motion. His office occupied the 14th floor of a smaller tower on South Church Street, 6 blocks from the Marion. Modest by Charlotte standards. No view of the skyline. No espresso machine. 2 paralegals, 1 associate, a reception area with chairs that were comfortable without being expensive. The kind of law office that signaled competence rather than spectacle, which was exactly why Nolan had hired him in 1999 when a 28-year-old NCA and T graduate walked into Jerome's office with a business plan written on legal pad paper and a cashier's check for his first commercial property acquisition that made Jerome check the amount twice. Jerome was 61 now, gray at the temples, reading glasses that lived on a chain around his neck. He had managed the Marion Greer Legacy Trust since its formation on March 14, 1998, 26 years of filings, acquisitions, tax strategy, and the particular kind of discretion that comes from representing a client who wanted his wealth to remain invisible. Nolan's instruction had always been the same. The trust operates. I don't appear. The building management company answers to your office. The tenants deal with your name on the lease correspondence. My name stays in the filing cabinet. For 19 years that arrangement had held. Jerome signed the letters. Jerome attended the lease negotiations. Jerome reviewed the quarterly reports from Stall Facilities Management, the same reports that, in the most recent quarter, had documented 3 performance deficiencies against a single custodial employee whose Social Security number matched the trust's sole beneficial owner. Jerome had flagged those reports, had told Nolan, in the careful language of an attorney advising a client who is also a friend, that the situation was escalating and that intervention was advisable. Nolan had declined, had said the same thing he always said when Jerome suggested revealing his identity. Not yet. Now it was yet. And Jerome was preparing for the reveal the way a surgeon prepares for an operation, by assembling every instrument before making the first cut. If you thought part 1 was intense, you have no idea what's coming. Stay right here, because the next 10 minutes will flip this entire story on its head. Saturday. Jerome's first call was to a notary public. Odessa Carver met him at his office at 9 a.m., carrying the marble-patterned composition notebook in a plastic grocery bag, handling it with the care of someone transporting evidence, which, functionally, she was. The notarization took 40 minutes. Each of the 14 entries was photographed, time-stamped, and certified. Odessa signed an affidavit confirming that the entries were made contemporaneously with the incidents they described, that no entries had been added or modified after the fact, and that she was willing to testify to the contents under oath if required. You understand that this document may be used in legal proceedings, Jerome said, his pen hovering over the last certification stamp. Odessa adjusted her reading glasses. I've been sitting at that desk for 31 years watching people get treated like they don't matter. If this notebook is what it takes to make that stop, then stamp it, file it, and send it wherever it needs to go. Jerome stamped it, filed it, and made 3 certified copies. Odessa stood to leave, pulling her coat from the back of the chair. At the door, she paused. Mr. Wilder, can I ask you something? Of course. How long have you known? About Mr. Greer? About who he really is? Jerome chose his words the way he chose legal arguments, carefully, with respect for the weight they carried. 23 years. Since the day he walked into my office with a business plan and a cashier's check and asked me to help him build something that would outlast both of us. Odessa absorbed this. 23 years. Nearly as long as she had worked at the Marion. She had spent over a decade handing Nolan his shift log, accepting his thermos of coffee, watching him push a cart through a lobby he owned, and she had never known. The realization was not anger. It was something closer to wonder, the feeling you get when you learn that a landscape you thought you knew had been hiding a mountain the whole time. He could have stopped at any time, she said. The inspections, the pocket searches, Brock putting hands on him, he could have just told them. He could have. But that's not who he is, and more importantly, that's not what the evidence would have shown. If he reveals himself at the first sign of trouble, there's no pattern, no documentation, no 8 months of systematic targeting to present to the EEOC. He needed the pattern to exist before he could prove it existed. Jerome paused. And frankly, Odessa, your notebook is why the pattern is provable. Without your entries, it's his word against theirs. With your entries, it's 14 documented incidents corroborated by a 31-year employee with no motive to fabricate. Odessa looked at the notebook in its plastic bag, now bearing the notary's seal. She had started writing in it on a Tuesday night in June after watching Brock Tillman put his hand on a man's chest and tell him to go around. She had not known what the notebook would become, had not known it would travel from a reception desk to a lawyer's office to the center of a corporate reckoning. She had written in it because some things need to be written down before they can be forgotten, and because forgetting is how systems stay broken. Thank you, she said, for listening. Thank you for writing. Jerome held the door. Not many people would have. Odessa walked out into the Charlotte morning, pulled her coat tighter against the October air. She had a shift starting in 9 hours, and between now and then she needed to sleep, eat, and adjust to the knowledge that the building she had worked in for 3 decades was owned by a man who had brought her a thermos of coffee every Thursday for 11 years and never once mentioned it. She would ask him about it eventually, when this was over, when the documents were filed and the consequences were distributed and the conference rooms had settled. She would ask him why. Not why he owned the building. That story she could piece together from the photographs on his walls and the diploma from NCA&T and the brass clasp engraved MG. She would ask why he kept cleaning it, why he kept pushing the cart, why he kept coming back to a job that paid $14 an hour when the building it took place in earned that amount in rent every 6 seconds. She thought she already knew the answer, but she wanted to hear him say it. Sunday, Jerome drafted a litigation hold request directed to Pinnacle Capital Group's general counsel, demanding preservation of all electronic communications, security footage, personnel records, and internal memoranda related to the employment and termination of Nolan A. Greer. The request cited Federal Rule of Civil Procedure 37E, which imposed sanctions for spoliation of electronically stored information relevant to reasonably anticipated litigation. The letter was 7 pages. It identified Paige Kessler, Victor Stahl, Brock Tillman, and Meredith Thorne by name. It specified date ranges. It referenced the EEOC charge number. And at the bottom of page 7, in a paragraph that Jerome had written and rewritten 4 times before settling on the final language, it contained the sentence that would detonate the arrangement that had kept Nolan's identity private for 2 decades. Please be advised that the Marion Greer Legacy Trust, as landlord and beneficial owner of the property located at 401 South Tryon Street, Charlotte, North Carolina, also known as the Marion Tower, has a direct interest in the matters described herein, and that the trust's sole trustee and beneficial owner, Nolan A. Greer, is the individual whose employment was terminated on October 24, 2024. Jerome read the sentence aloud in his empty office. Let the words fill the room. 26 years of privacy, dissolved in 43 words. He poured himself a glass of water, drank it slowly. Then he called Nolan. Everything is ready. Trust deed certified. Lease agreement tabbed to Section 14B. Investor disclosure highlighted. Odessa's notebook notarized with 3 copies. Litigation hold drafted and ready for delivery. I'm going in at 10 tomorrow morning. I want to be there, Nolan said. No. Jerome's voice was gentle but firm. If you're in the room, it becomes personal. It becomes a confrontation between you and the people who wronged you. If I'm in the room alone, it's institutional. It's a trust communicating with its tenant through counsel. The documents speak. You don't have to. Nolan was quiet for a long moment. The kitchen faucet dripped twice in the silence. You're right. He paused. Make sure they understand where the name came from, Jerome. The building's name. Make sure they know who Marion was. I'll make sure. Jerome set the litigation hold letter on top of the stack. 7 pages of legal language, 43 words of revelation, and 3 documents that would rearrange the hierarchy of a 32-story tower before lunch. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. For them, not for you. Jerome read the sentence aloud in his empty office one more time. Let the words fill the room. Then he locked the documents in his briefcase, turned off the desk lamp, and went home to sleep, the particular sleep of a lawyer who knows that the morning will bring a meeting his adversaries have not yet imagined. He printed the letter, sealed it in an envelope, set it on his desk beside the 3 documents that would accompany it to Pinnacle's office the following morning. Monday, 10 a.m. Jerome Wilder walked into the lobby of the Marion Tower wearing a gray suit and carrying a leather briefcase that contained the architectural blueprints of a reckoning 26 years in the making. Brock Tillman sat at the security desk, feet on the drawer, phone in hand. He glanced up as Jerome approached, registered the suit, the briefcase, the professional carriage of someone who belonged on an upper floor, and waved him through without a word. No bag check, No ID demand, no hand on the chest, no redirect to the service entrance. The contrast between this reception and the one Nolan received every shift for 11 months was so precise it could have been submitted as evidence of differential treatment without a single word of explanation. Jerome rode the express elevator to 26, Pinnacle Capital Group's executive reception. He approached the front desk with the unhurried confidence of someone who had spent 30 years walking into rooms where he was not expected and leaving them changed. Jerome Wilder, counsel for the Marion Greer Legacy Trust. I'm here to see Ms. Meredith Thorne regarding a lease compliance matter. He set a business card on the counter. She'll want to take this meeting. The receptionist, young, professional, trained to screen visitors with polished efficiency, studied the card. The words Marion Greer Legacy Trust did not register as significant. Why would they? The trust was a name on correspondence that crossed the building management company's desk, not Pinnacle's, a landlord entity, background infrastructure, the kind of thing tenants never think about the way fish never think about water. Do you have an appointment, Mr. Wilder? I do not, but the matter involves Pinnacle's lease at this location, and it's time sensitive. I'd recommend notifying Ms. Thorne's office directly. Something in Jerome's tone, not aggressive, not urgent, but carrying the particular gravity of a man who understood that the information in his briefcase would rearrange careers, caused the receptionist to pick up her phone rather than offer a seat in the waiting area. 22 minutes later, Jerome was escorted to the main conference room on 26. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking uptown Charlotte, a mahogany table that seated 16. Water glasses already poured. The room where Pinnacle's partners closed deals worth hundreds of millions, and where, this morning, they were about to discover that their 14-floor lease was balanced on a clause they had never bothered to read. Meredith Thorne entered first, navy blazer, reading glasses. The same expression she had worn in the conference room on 18 when she terminated Nolan. Controlled authority, the face of someone who occupied the top of every hierarchy she entered. Behind her, Graham Pace, Pinnacle's in-house general counsel, 48, wire-rimmed glasses. The cautious posture of a lawyer who had been told this meeting involved a lease issue and was already calculating worst-case scenarios. Behind him, summoned hastily and visibly confused about why, Victor Stahl, clipboard absent for once. His hands empty and uncertain, as though the absence of paper to hold had removed a load-bearing wall from his personality. 3 people on one side of the table, Jerome Wilder alone on the other. The math looked uneven. It was about to invert. Mr. Wilder? Meredith did not offer her hand, did not sit until he sat. The micro-choreography of a woman who controlled rooms through positioning. I'm told this involves our lease. We're current on all obligations, so I'm not sure what brings you here. You are current on rent, Jerome agreed. He opened his briefcase with the deliberate pace of a man who understood that timing was a form of power. The issue is not financial, it's contractual. Specifically, it involves a provision of your master lease that appears to have been violated. Graham Pace leaned forward. Which provision? Jerome placed 3 documents on the mahogany table, fanned them slightly, each one encased in a clear document protector, each one carrying the weight of information that had been private for over 2 decades. He placed his index finger on the first document. Document 1. The trust deed for the Marion Greer Legacy Trust, established March 14, 1998, under the laws of the state of North Carolina. He read from the certified copy, his voice carrying the measured cadence of testimony. The trust's assets include, but are not limited to, the commercial property located at 401 South Tryon Street, Charlotte, North Carolina, commonly known as the Marion Tower. The trust was established with a sole trustee and beneficial owner. Jerome paused. Let the silence do its work. That individual is Nolan Augustus Greer. The name landed on the table like a stone dropped into still water. Meredith's expression did not change, not because she was composed, but because the name had not yet connected to any circuit in her memory that carried voltage. Nolan Greer. 2 words. a name she had seen once on a termination letter she had signed 3 weeks ago and had not thought about since. Graham Pace, however, processed faster. His eyes moved from Jerome to Meredith to the document and back. The arithmetic was visible on his face. Landlord, trust, beneficial owner, Nolan Greer. The equations assembling themselves into a sum that made his jaw tighten. "Are you saying," Graham began, "I'm saying that the custodial employee your company terminated on October 24th is the sole beneficial owner of this building and has been since the trust acquired it in 2003. Jerome's voice remained level. "He has worked 1 custodial shift per week in this building for the past 19 years. The building staff, management company, and all tenants were informed of the trust's ownership at lease signing. The trustee's personal identity was kept private at his request, a request this firm's predecessor counsel honored without issue." Meredith's face changed, not all at once. In stages, like a building losing structural support floor by floor, the collapse starting high and working its way down. Recognition, confusion, recalculation. And then something that was not quite fear, but lived in the same neighborhood, the dawning understanding that the man she had called this individual, the man she had refused to look at, the man whose shoulder Brock Tillman had grabbed while escorting him from a building he owned, was not a janitor who had been caught stealing. He was the janitor who signed the lease that kept the lights on in this conference room. "That's..." Meredith's voice thinned. "There must be a mistake." Victor Stahl made a sound, not words, a sound. The involuntary exhalation of a man whose respiratory system had decided to process what his brain had not yet accepted. His face had gone the particular shade of gray that comes from understanding, all at once, that every inspection report he had fabricated, every photograph he had taken of fingerprints on glass partitions, every clipboard notation he had entered under the header "deficiency" had been filed against the man who owned the building where the clipboard was stored. The custodial employee he had been building a termination case against was the client whose satisfaction determined whether his own contract would be renewed. Graham Pace held up a hand, the gesture of a lawyer who needs everyone to stop talking so he can think. His eyes moved across the trust deed the way eyes move across a landscape after an earthquake, cataloging damage, assessing structural integrity, identifying which parts of the previous reality still held and which had collapsed. "Mr. Wilder, does your client have documentation of the chain of ownership, transfer records, tax filings showing the trust as beneficial owner?" 26 years of filings, Mecklenburg County Property Records, IRS, Form 1041 for every year since the trust's establishment. North Carolina Secretary of State Corporate Filings, all available upon request. Jerome's tone was patient. He had anticipated this question. Had anticipated every question, because the questions people ask when their assumptions collapse follow predictable patterns: denial, verification, damage assessment, negotiation. He was currently in Phase 2. Phase 3 would arrive with the next document. "There's no mistake." Jerome placed his finger on the second document. Document 2, the master lease agreement between the Marion Greer Legacy Trust as landlord and Pinnacle Capital Group, LP, as tenant. Executed September 1st, 2019. I direct your attention to Section 14, subsection B. He read aloud, and the words filled the conference room with a pressure that had nothing to do with climate control. Section 14, subsection B. Morality and Conduct Clause. The landlord reserves the right to terminate this lease upon 90 days written notice if the tenant, its officers, employees, or agents engage in conduct that constitutes unlawful discrimination on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, or national origin, as defined by applicable federal or state law, within the premises, or in connection with the tenant's use of the premises. Graham Pace closed his eyes. Just for a moment, 2 seconds of professional anguish, the expression of a general counsel who has just discovered that his company's largest real estate commitment is attached to a conduct clause that his client has been violating in documented, notarized, federally filed detail for 8 months. Document 3. Jerome's finger moved to the final page. Pinnacle Capital Group Investor Disclosure Filing. The Marion Greer Legacy Trust holds a 12.3% equity stake in Pinnacle Capital Group LP, acquired through Series C preferred share purchase, dated September 9, 2021. He looked up, made eye contact with Meredith. My client is not only your landlord, Ms. Thorne, he is one of your company's largest individual investors. Victor Stahl had not spoken since entering the room. He sat at the far end of the table, his chair pushed back slightly, as though physical distance from the documents might insulate him from their implications. His face had progressed through its own sequence: confusion, recognition, and now something that looked remarkably like the expression of a man seeing the walls of a room he has been building close in around him. I'd like to speak with our legal team, privately. Meredith's voice had lost the silk. What remained was steel, but brittle now, the kind that cracks under sudden load. Of course. Jerome reached into his briefcase again. But before you do, I want to present the evidentiary record that accompanied my client's EEOC charge, number 846-2024-03179, and the additional documentation obtained through the litigation hold we served on your general counsel's office this morning. He produced the documents one at a time, laid them on the table with the precision of a dealer turning cards. The notarized notebook, 14 entries, 8 months. Blue ink on ruled paper, each page now bearing a notary's embossed seal and Odessa Carver's sworn signature. The photographs of Victor's fabricated inspection form. Version 3.1, effective date, this date, with no revision history, no management approval, no predecessor versions. The photograph of the termination letter dated October 23rd, one day before the laptop was allegedly discovered on Nolan's cart. And then Jerome produced the item that changed the room's temperature. During the 72-hour period following my client's termination, my office filed a litigation hold request with Pinnacle Capital Group's IT department, requiring preservation of all electronic communications relevant to the matters described in the EEOC charge. Jerome opened a folder. Pinnacle's IT compliance team, acting under the legal obligation imposed by the hold, preserved the following email, which had been deleted from sender and recipient inboxes, but remained on the corporate backup server per your company's 90-day retention protocol. He read the email aloud, his voice steady, his eyes on Meredith. From Paige Kessler to Victor Stahl. Date, October 23rd, 2024, 3:51 p.m. Subject, tonight. Jerome paused, letting the date register. October 23rd, the day before the laptop appeared on Nolan's cart. Body. Cart will be in the corridor by 8. Make sure B is ready to find it. M wants this done before the board meeting. B was Brock. M was Meredith. The email was not ambiguous. It was not open to interpretation. It was a coordination message, sent 28 hours before Victor Stahl reached under Nolan's supply cart with a hand that traveled in a straight line to a laptop he already knew was there, because the email told him it would be. Graham Pace removed his glasses, set them on the table, rubbed the bridge of his nose with thumb and forefinger in the universal gesture of a lawyer calculating damages. Additionally, Jerome continued, the laptop's own system metadata, preserved by your IT department under the litigation hold, shows the following chain of custody. The device, serial number MK7419 Delta, was checked out to Ms. Thorne's executive assistant at 3:47 p.m. on October 23rd. The checkout log shows a return at 4:12 p.m., 25 minutes. The laptop was then reported as stolen at 4:30 p.m. the same day, 18 minutes after it was returned to the device closet. He closed the folder. Someone checked the laptop out, removed it from the premises, and reported it stolen, all within 43 minutes. On the same day that Paige Kessler emailed Victor Stahl with instructions about a cart being in a corridor at 8 p.m., the room was silent in the way that rooms become silent when every person in them is performing the same internal calculation. How bad is this? The answer, visible in the rigid set of Graham Pace's shoulders and the white knuckles of Meredith Thorne's interlaced fingers, was very. Meredith spoke first. Her voice had changed again, stripped now of both silk and steel, reduced to something that sounded almost like the voice of a person rather than a position. That email could mean anything. B could refer to Ms. Thorne. Jerome's interruption was gentle but absolute. I'm not here to debate the email's interpretation with you. I'm here to inform you of the trust's position. Your own legal team will advise you on how to interpret the evidence. What I can tell you is what the EEOC investigator will see when she reviews this file. A terminated employee who is black, 14 documented incidents of differential treatment targeting only that employee, a termination letter backdated by 24 hours, and an internal email that coordinates the placement of a device on the terminated employee's supply cart on the evening before that device is conveniently discovered by the email's recipient. He paused. Interpretation will be for the trier of fact, but the facts themselves are not in dispute. Graham Pace had produced a legal pad from somewhere and was writing rapidly, the shorthand of a general counsel drafting an action plan while the crisis was still forming, the way emergency workers start triaging before the ambulance doors fully open. Victor Stahl spoke for the first time. His voice was higher than it had been in every previous interaction, the pitch of a man whose authority had been structural, borrowed from the institution above him, and who had just discovered that the institution's foundation was not where he thought it was. I was told I was following instructions from... He stopped, looked at Meredith. The look contained a question that was also an accusation. You told me this was authorized. You told me this was sanctioned. You told me the janitor was a problem that needed to be solved, and I solved it the way you asked me to, and now you're going to let me sit here holding the paperwork alone. Meredith did not return the look. She was staring at the business card Jerome had placed on the table. Nolan A. Greer. Marion Greer Legacy Trust. The name she had refused to speak during the termination meeting when she had called him Mr. Greer with the curt efficiency of someone reading a label rather than addressing a person. The name that was now printed on a card that identified him as the owner of the surface her water glass was sitting on. I want to be clear about what happens next. Jerome had not raised his voice once during the entire meeting. He did not need to. Volume is the tool of people who lack leverage. Jerome had leverage measured in trust deeds and morality clauses and equity stakes. My client has filed an EEOC charge. That process will continue regardless of any resolution reached in this room. Additionally, the trust is evaluating whether Section 14B of the master lease has been triggered. If it has, Pinnacle Capital Group will receive 90 days written notice to vacate 14 floors of this building. 14 floors, 90 days. The mathematics of that sentence. The cost of relocating an entire regional operation. The client relationships disrupted. The market signal sent by a forced departure. The commercial real estate implications in a city where Class A office space operated at 93% occupancy, registered on Graham Pace's face like a seismograph recording a tremor. My client is not interested in monetary damages. Jerome straightened his jacket. He's interested in accountability. You'll be hearing from my office within the week regarding the trust's position on Section 14B. I suggest your outside counsel read it carefully. All of it, including the remedies. He walked out of the conference room, past the executive reception desk, into the elevator. Through the lobby where Brock Tillman sat with his feet on the drawer, scrolling through his phone, not looking up as the man who had just restructured his employer's future walked past the same security desk where Nolan Greer had surrendered his access badge 3 weeks ago. If this story has you on the edge of your seat, hit that subscribe button now, because what happens next is going to change everything for everyone in that building. The institutional response moved at the speed of institutional self-preservation, which is to say, fast when the threat is existential. Tuesday morning, 31 hours after Jerome's visit, Pinnacle Capital Group's board of directors convened an emergency session by video conference. 12 members, 3 time zones, 1 agenda item, the Marion Greer Legacy Trust matter and its implications for Pinnacle's Charlotte operations. Jerome learned the details through a combination of formal correspondence and the informal channels that exist in every city's legal community, the network of associates and former colleagues who trade information the way traders move currency, in small denominations that accumulate into comprehensive pictures. The board's first action was to hire outside counsel, the Charlotte office of Barwell and Associates, a litigation firm whose reputation for corporate crisis management came with hourly rates that reflected the severity of the crises they managed. Barwell assigned a senior partner named Catherine Liu, who spent her first 6 hours reviewing the documents Jerome had presented and producing a preliminary risk assessment that, according to a source in the firm, began with the sentence, "The trust's position is legally sound, and the evidentiary record is unusually well documented for a workplace discrimination claim." The board's second action was to initiate an internal workplace investigation conducted by an outside HR consulting firm with no prior relationship to Pinnacle, a standard defensive measure designed to demonstrate good faith to regulators, courts, and investors who might later ask what Pinnacle did when it learned about the problem. The board's third action was the one that mattered to the people inside the Marion Tower. Meredith Thorne was placed on paid administrative leave, effective immediately, pending the outcome of the internal investigation. Her office on 22 was locked, her access credentials deactivated, her name removed from the internal directory. Not terminated, the institution protecting itself while appearing to act, the corporate equivalent of putting a load-bearing wall behind a curtain and hoping no one notices the structural compromise. Paid leave, full salary, benefits intact. The golden insulation that separates corporate accountability from actual consequence, because firing a regional vice president without completing a formal investigation creates wrongful termination exposure, and Pinnacle's lawyers were not about to solve one legal problem by creating another. Brock Tillman received a different kind of attention. Jerome's office sent a formal letter to the building management company, not Pinnacle, but the entity that actually employed Brock, citing specific incidents from Odessa's notarized log. Entry 1. Physical contact in the lobby. Entry 4. Unannounced cart search without explanation. Entry 9. Cart contents dumped on corridor floor. Entry 13. Arm grab during pocket search. Each incident described with dates, times, and witness names, each one a potential claim under North Carolina assault and battery law if the trust chose to pursue it. The building management company's insurance carrier reviewed the letter. Insurance carriers do not evaluate claims based on morality or fairness. They evaluate claims based on liability exposure and settlement probability. The carrier's assessment: high exposure, probable settlement demand, recommended immediate corrective action. Brock Tillman was suspended without pay. Not for the racism, not for the physical intimidation, not for the 8 months of targeted harassment, for the liability. Because in the corporate ecosystem, behavior becomes unacceptable not when it causes harm, but when it creates financial risk. The distinction mattered to Brock's paycheck but not to his rent, which was due in 11 days and would not be paid by the moral clarity of institutional self-protection. Victor Stahl's situation unfolded with the quiet efficiency of a contract non-renewal. His agreement with Stahl Facilities Management, the company he had founded and that bore his name, included an annual performance review clause tied to client satisfaction metrics. The Marion Greer Legacy Trust, as the building's owner, was the ultimate client, and the ultimate client's attorney had just presented documented evidence that Victor had fabricated inspection reports, created backdated audit forms, and participated in coordinating the planting of stolen property on an employee's cart. The building management company informed Victor that his contract would not be renewed at its next anniversary date, 6 weeks away. No termination for cause. No admission of wrongdoing. Just a quiet administrative death. The kind of career ending that gets filed under business decision rather than consequence. Victor would land somewhere. Men like Victor always landed somewhere. The professional ecosystem for facilities managers was large enough to absorb a quiet departure without asking too many questions, especially when the departure came with a neutral reference letter and no public record of misconduct. Paige Kessler was reassigned. Same company, same salary. Different floor, the 7th, where a regional insurance brokerage occupied space that required no executive-level administrative support and no interaction with Pinnacle's staff. Her email to Victor, the one that read, Cart will be in the corridor by 8. Make sure B is ready to find it. M wants this done before the board meeting, was characterized by Pinnacle's outside counsel as potentially ambiguous and subject to alternative interpretation. The interpretation they offered, B, could refer to building security generally, not Brock specifically. M could refer to the monthly facilities meeting, not Meredith. The interpretation required believing that Paige Kessler had sent an email about routine building security logistics at 3:51 p.m. on the same day that a laptop was removed from its checkout system, planted on a specific employee's cart, and discovered by the man the email was addressed to, and that all of these events were coincidental. It was the kind of interpretation that lawyers construct not because they believe it, but because their job requires building defensible positions out of available materials, the way architects build load-bearing structures out of whatever the site provides. Paige kept her job, kept her salary, lost her domain, the executive floors where she had controlled access codes, breakroom privileges, and the invisible architecture of who belonged and who did not. In corporate terms, she had been neutralized. In human terms, she had been moved from a position where she could cause harm to a position where she could not, without anyone having to say out loud what she had done or why it mattered. And then there was Darren Lowell. Darren Lowell was not disciplined, was not reassigned, was not investigated, was not questioned beyond a perfunctory interview conducted by the outside HR firm, during which he stated that he had reported a plumbing leak in good faith, that he had no knowledge of any laptop being placed on anyone's cart, and that he considered Nolan Greer a friend and a colleague whose termination he found regrettable. The HR firm noted Darren's statement, cross-referenced it with available evidence, found no physical proof connecting Darren to the laptop plant. Paige's email referenced B, not D. The security cameras on the corridor outside Suite 2200 had been overwritten under the 14-day retention cycle. No fingerprints had been taken from the laptop sleeve. No witness had observed Darren placing anything on or near Nolan's cart. Darren Lowell continued working the night shift at the Marion Tower, still brought donuts on Fridays, still smiled at everyone, still walked past Odessa's reception desk with the easy, open-faced friendliness of a man who understood that the best disguise for betrayal was warmth, and who had never been caught because warmth, unlike emails and metadata, does not leave a recoverable digital footprint. That was the part of the story that did not resolve cleanly. The collaborator who walked free. The friendly face that concealed the hands that planted the evidence. The person whose guilt was known but not provable, suspected but not documented, real but not actionable. Every justice story has one. The gap where accountability should be, but isn't. The space where the system's tools, evidence, documentation, procedure, fail to reach because the person who did the harm was careful enough, or lucky enough, or both. Darren Lowell was both. 3 weeks after Jerome's visit to Pinnacle's conference room, the dust had not settled so much as rearranged itself into new patterns. The EEOC investigation against Stahl Facilities Management remained open. Charge number 846-2024-03179. Tanya Briggs had received the respondent's position statement, 18 pages of legal language, asserting at-will employment, documented performance deficiencies, and legitimate business reasons for termination. She had also received Jerome's rebuttal, 23 pages, including the notarized notebook, the backdated termination letter, and the Paige Kessler email. The investigation would continue for an estimated 8 to 14 months. Justice did not hurry, not for janitors, not for building owners, not for anyone. Pinnacle's internal investigation progressed at the pace set by Catherine Liu and the outside HR firm, which is to say, at a pace designed to be thorough enough to satisfy regulators and slow enough to avoid producing conclusions that might complicate the company's legal position. Interviews were scheduled, documents were reviewed, preliminary findings were described as ongoing. Meredith Thorne's paid leave extended into its 4th week. Her attorney, retained privately, not through Pinnacle, had begun negotiating with the company's board. The likely outcome, visible to anyone familiar with corporate separation procedures, was a resignation with negotiated severance, a mutual non-disclosure agreement, and a departure narrative that would describe the separation as a strategic decision rather than a consequence. She would land at another firm within a year, probably 6 months. The financial services industry was large enough and forgetful enough to absorb a quiet departure without asking the questions that the answers would make uncomfortable. The system was doing what systems do, absorbing the shock, redistributing the weight, reorganizing around the damage without changing the architecture that had made the damage possible. The individuals who had constructed the 8-month campaign against Nolan Greer were being processed through institutional mechanisms designed to manage liability rather than produce justice. And the mechanisms were functioning exactly as designed. On a Wednesday morning in mid-November, Jerome Wilder called Nolan. Pinnacle's board wants to talk settlement. Their outside counsel reached out yesterday. They're offering financial compensation, a public apology, and Meredith's permanent removal from any role involving the Charlotte operation. Nolan was sitting at his kitchen table, the same table where Odessa had read her notebook, the same table where he had opened the leather folder, the same table where Marion Greer had served dinner and told her son that the distance between mopping a floor and owning a building was shorter than most people thought, and that the people who understood that distance were the ones who never forgot what the mop handle felt like. "I don't want their money," Nolan said. "I know. But they need to give you something, or they can't close this out. That's how corporate resolution works. There has to be a deliverable, a document, something the board can point to and say, 'We addressed this.' Then give them a document." Nolan opened the kitchen drawer. Not the one with the leather folder. That one was in Jerome's office safe now, its contents deployed and documented. A different drawer. He pulled out a single sheet of paper, handwritten, the product of 3 nights of sitting at this table, thinking about what his mother would have wanted from the people who had treated her son the way they treated anyone who pushed a cart for a living. He read it to Jerome over the phone. The Marion Greer Legacy Trust Proposal for Workplace Equity Partnership. 1. Pinnacle Capital Group will establish a binding diversity hiring initiative for all Charlotte area operations, subject to annual third-party audit for a minimum of 5 years. 2. Pinnacle will fund, in perpetuity, the Marion Greer Scholarship for first-generation college students from service industry families. Annual value, 4 full tuition scholarships to any accredited North Carolina institution. 3. The building management company will implement an independent complaint mechanism for custodial and service staff at all trust-owned properties, with quarterly reports submitted to the trust's office. 4. Brock Tillman's suspension will be converted to permanent termination, and the building management company will provide documentation that future security supervisors receive training on de-escalation, implicit bias, and the legal limits of authority in non-law enforcement security roles. Jerome was quiet for a moment. Then, "No money. No money. Not a dollar. Not for me." Nolan looked at the photograph of Marion on the living room wall. The large one. The one where she was smiling in her work clothes outside a house she had cleaned for 22 years. "The scholarship won't carry my name. It'll carry hers, Marion Greer, the woman who cleaned houses in West Charlotte so her son could go to college, the woman whose name is on the building they work in and never bothered to ask about." "Nolan." Jerome's voice carried the weight of 23 years of professional respect and personal understanding. "This is a good list. I'll present it this afternoon. One more thing. The plaque in the lobby. The small one by the elevator bank. The one nobody reads." "What about it?" "Make sure they read it." The negotiations took 9 days. Pinnacle's board pushed back on the perpetuity clause. Funding 4 scholarships forever was an open-ended financial commitment that made CFOs uncomfortable. Jerome held firm. The trust held a 12.3% equity stake and a lease morality clause that could force Pinnacle to vacate 14 floors with 90 days' notice. The math was not complicated. Pinnacle agreed. Every point, the diversity initiative, the scholarship, the complaint mechanism, Brock's termination, the training requirements, signed by the board chair, countersigned by Jerome, notarized, filed. The signing took place in Jerome's office on South Church Street, not in Pinnacle's conference room, not in the Marion Tower, not in any space that carried the company's name or brand. Catherine Liu arrived with the associate carrying 2 banker's boxes of documentation. Jerome met them with Nolan, who wore pressed slacks and a button-down shirt and the same polished boots he wore to every shift. Catherine Liu shook Nolan's hand, held the grip for a moment longer than professional courtesy required. She had read the file, all of it, every page of Odessa's notebook, every photograph, every email, the trust deed and the lease agreement and the investor disclosure. She had spent 6 hours reviewing evidence of what her client's employees had done to the man standing in front of her, and the experience had produced something that her billable hours report would not capture: the uncomfortable recognition that the system she served had failed to prevent exactly the kind of harm it claimed to prohibit. Mr. Greer, Catherine's voice carried the careful professionalism of someone who was both adversary and witness. My client has authorized me to express— I don't need an expression. Nolan's interruption was not rude. It was efficient. I need the signatures on the document. The expressions can happen later, if they're genuine. Right now, I need the scholarship funded and the complaint line operational. Catherine nodded. Set the documents on the table. The signing took 11 minutes. 6 copies, each one bearing the signatures that converted Nolan's handwritten list, the one composed over 3 nights at the kitchen table where Marion used to serve dinner, into binding legal obligations. When the last signature was dry, Jerome opened a smaller folder. Inside was a single sheet, the scholarship's founding document. At the top, in bold type, the Marion Greer Scholarship for first-generation college students from service industry families. Jerome read the eligibility criteria aloud, his voice carrying the formality of a proclamation. Open to sons and daughters of custodial workers, food service employees, building maintenance staff, groundskeepers, housekeepers, and other service industry professionals who are first-generation college applicants. 4 full tuition scholarships annually. No geographic restriction. Any accredited institution in the state of North Carolina. Nolan listened. He did not speak, but his hand moved to his breast pocket, the pocket where the photograph lived, and rested there, over the fabric, over the image of a woman in a floral dress who had cleaned houses so that her son could attend a university she never set foot inside. Catherine Liu left Jerome's office carrying 1 set of signed documents and a business card she would keep in her desk drawer for years. Not filed, not archived, just kept, because some cases remind you why you went to law school, and other cases remind you why the law exists, and this one had done both. The scholarship announcement ran in the Charlotte Observer the following Thursday. Below the fold, page 7 of the Metro section. Not front-page news. Not a headline. A small article, 6 paragraphs, describing a new scholarship funded by the Marion Greer Legacy Trust. The article did not mention the EEOC charge, did not mention the termination, did not mention a janitor or a supply cart or a planted laptop. It mentioned only the scholarship, the eligibility criteria, and a quote from Jerome Wilder. This scholarship honors Marion Greer, a Charlotte woman who spent her career in domestic service. Her family believes that the children of service workers deserve every opportunity their parents' labor makes possible. 6 paragraphs. Page 7. The kind of news that most readers skip on their way to the weather forecast or the sports scores. But in a Pinnacle Capital Group office in Richmond, Virginia, 400 miles northeast of Charlotte, on the 9th floor of a building that was not owned by a trust with a morality clause, someone read those 6 paragraphs, read them twice, then opened a desk drawer, took out an envelope, and began typing a letter. Brock Tillman's suspension was converted to permanent termination by the building management company 3 days after Pinnacle signed the agreement. His termination letter cited conduct inconsistent with the company's commitment to a safe and equitable workplace, language so carefully generic it could have been generated by an algorithm. Brock's union representative filed a grievance. The grievance was pending review. It would be pending review for months, processed through arbitration procedures designed to protect employee rights, but equally effective at delaying accountability until the public attention moved on to the next outrage. Brock Tillman packed his locker at the Marion Tower on a Thursday afternoon. Nobody walked him out. Nobody checked his pockets. Nobody put a hand on his chest or grabbed his arm or told him to use the service entrance. He walked through the lobby and out the revolving door without ceremony. The same door he had pushed Nolan toward 3 weeks ago. The same lobby where he had blocked access and demanded compliance, and treated a public walkway like a checkpoint. The revolving door turned behind him. The lobby went quiet, and Odessa Carver, sitting at the reception desk where she had sat for 31 years, wrote the time in her notebook. Not the marble-patterned one, that was in Jerome's safe. A new one. Fresh pages, blue ink. Some habits are worth keeping. The news moved through the building the way news moves through any institution, in whispers and glances, and the particular electricity that fills corridors when power changes hands. The custodial staff heard first, because custodial staff always hear first. They occupy the spaces between the official conversations, the hallways and break rooms and stairwells where people talk without thinking about who might be listening. By Friday of the first week after Jerome's visit, every janitor, every security officer, every maintenance worker in the Marion Tower knew some version of the truth. The quiet night shift custodian they had watched get escorted out of the building was the building's owner. The versions varied in detail. Some said he was a billionaire. He was not. 400 million is substantial, but not 10-figure territory. Some said he had fired Meredith personally in a dramatic confrontation. He had not. He had never spoken to Meredith after the termination meeting. Some said the FBI was involved. It was not. The EEOC is a federal agency, but operates in a different universe from law enforcement. The details warped through repetition the way all institutional narratives warp, gaining drama and losing accuracy with each retelling. But the core was always the same. The janitor owned the building, and the people who had treated him like he did not matter had just discovered that he mattered more than anyone else in the lobby. Marcus Webb, the newer hire who had stood frozen against the wall on the night of Nolan's termination, holding a dustpan, watching and saying nothing, approached Odessa at the reception desk 3 days after the news broke. "Did you know?" His voice was quiet. The question carried guilt the way a cup carries water, filled to the rim, spilling at the edges. "I knew he was a good man. I knew he was being treated wrong. I wrote it down because that's what you do when you see something that needs to be on the record." Odessa set her pen on the desk. "But his business is his business. I didn't need to know who he was. To know what was being done to him was wrong." Marcus looked at the floor. The same floor Nolan had mopped every shift. "I should have said something. When they were, I just stood there." "Yes, you did." Odessa's voice was not unkind, but it was not gentle either. It was the voice of a woman who had spent 31 years watching people stand still while injustice moved around them, and who had decided, on a Tuesday night in June, to stop being one of those people. The question is what you do next, whether you just stand there the next time, because there's always a next time. Different building, different name on the cart, same situation. Marcus left the desk without speaking. But 2 weeks later, when a new security officer made a comment about a custodial worker's appearance that crossed a line visible to anyone paying attention, Marcus was the person who reported it to the building management company's complaint line. The new complaint line, the one established under Nolan's settlement terms, the one that generated quarterly reports sent directly to the trust's office. The report was filed on a Thursday, investigated by Friday, resolved by the following Monday. The system was not perfect, but it was responsive. And responsiveness, the willingness to treat a complaint as worthy of attention rather than as an inconvenience to be managed, was what Nolan had demanded. Not transformation, not perfection, responsiveness. The acknowledgement that the people who cleaned the building deserved the same institutional attention as the people who occupied it. This story isn't over yet. What Nolan does next, that's the part that will stay with you. Keep watching. A Thursday evening, 6:01 p.m., 3 weeks after the settlement was signed, 5 weeks after Jerome walked into Pinnacle's conference room, 8 weeks after Brock Tillman put his hand on Nolan Greer's chest in a lobby and told him to go around. Nolan Greer walked through the front entrance of the Marion Tower, not through the loading dock, not through the freight elevator, through the front. The same revolving door where the brass letters above the entrance caught the early evening light. The Marion. He wore a pressed janitorial uniform. Same ironed creases. Same polished boots. Same name patch. Nolan, embroidered in blue thread on the left chest. Same photograph in his breast pocket. Marion, floral dress. Smiling. He paused at the elevator bank, looked down. At knee height, mounted on the marble wall between the express elevator and the service elevator, there was a small brass plaque, 8 inches by 4 inches, installed 21 years ago when the building opened, polished weekly by custodial staff who never stopped to read it, walked past daily by tenants who had never bent down to see what it said. The plaque read, "For Marion A. Greer, who taught her son that every floor deserves the same care, whether you're building it or cleaning it. NAG 2003. NAG. Nolan Augustus Greer." The initials had been visible for 21 years. On a plaque at knee height, in a lobby where people looked up at the directory, ahead at the elevators, down at their phones, but never down at the wall where a son had mounted a promise to his mother in brass. Nolan looked at the plaque the way he looked at it every Thursday, quickly, privately, the glance of someone checking that a compass still points north. Then he straightened and pushed his cart toward the service elevator. The lobby was different now. Smaller changes that most people would not notice, the kind of changes that happen when the architecture stays the same, but the atmosphere shifts. A new security officer sat at Brock's old desk, younger, less mass, the posture of someone trained in customer service rather than crowd control. Page's name had been removed from the executive floor directory. Victor's parking space in the garage, the one marked Facilities Director, had been repainted with the generic label Reserved. Odessa Carver looked up from the reception desk. Her reading glasses caught the overhead light. Her hands rested on the desk surface, near but not touching, the new marble-patterned notebook. She did not speak. Nolan did not speak. The silence between them held the weight of 11 years of thermoses and Thursday nights, and a composition notebook that had traveled from a reception desk to a kitchen table to a notary's stamp to a lawyer's safe to the center of a conference room where it had helped dismantle a machine of institutional harassment. The silence held all of that, and it was enough. But then Odessa did something she had never done before. She stood up from the desk, walked around the counter, and hugged him. Not a professional gesture, not the polite half-embrace of colleagues. A full, firm, 31 years of watching hug that communicated everything the silence had held, and more. I saw you. I wrote it down, and I would do it again. Nolan hugged her back for 3 seconds. Then they separated, and Odessa returned to her desk, and Nolan adjusted his cart, and neither of them mentioned it again. Some things happen once, and don't need to happen twice to be permanent. Odessa nodded once. Nolan nodded back. He pushed his cart, new caster, no squeak, to the service elevator. Pressed 22. The doors opened onto the executive floor. Quiet. Half the lights on their after-hours dimming cycle. Meredith's office dark, her nameplate removed, the door standing open on a room stripped of personal effects, the bookshelves empty, the desk bare, the window reflecting nothing but Charlotte's skyline and the slowly darkening sky. Nolan parked his cart in the corridor, took out his mop, filled the bucket from the utility sink, added the cleaning solution, same brand, same ratio, same process he had used for 11 months, and would use tonight and would use next Thursday, and the Thursday after that. He mopped the floor. Starting from the far corner and working toward the elevator bank, counterclockwise, the same route he had optimized 11 months ago. The mop moved in arcs that covered the tile in overlapping patterns, leaving the surface wet and clean and smelling like the industrial lemon that would evaporate in 14 minutes. At 9:12 p.m., the stairwell door opened on 20. A figure stepped into the corridor, saw the mop, saw the man holding it, and stopped. Darren Lowell. He stood in the doorway for 4 seconds, long enough for recognition to pass between them, not the casual recognition of coworkers, but the deeper kind, the kind that exists between people who have shared a space and a shift and a locker room, while one of them was betraying the other. Darren's face performed several operations in rapid succession: surprise, recalibration, the assembly of a smile that he must have known, must have, no longer had the architecture to support. "Nolan." Darren's voice aimed for warmth and landed somewhere in the vicinity of caution. "Heard you were coming back. That's great, man, really great. Place wasn't the same without you." Nolan looked at Darren. The mop rested in his hands, motionless. He looked at the face that had asked him about phantom leaks, the hands that had stayed in pockets, counting seconds, the smile that had lasted a beat too long after every conversation, holding an expression after the feeling behind it had changed. He could say something, could name what Darren had done, put words to the betrayal that Odessa's notebook had documented and Paige's email had contextualized and the 11 minutes of unattended cart had enabled. He could say, "I know. I know it was you. I know about the leak that didn't exist. I know about the text message you deleted. I know that your friendship was a performance designed to keep me positioned for the trap. And I know that you walked away whistling while Brock walked me out of a building you now know I own." He could say all of that, but saying it would not produce evidence, would not generate documentation, would not create the kind of record that Tanya Briggs could investigate, or Jerome could present, or a judge could evaluate. Saying it would be satisfying in the way that confronting liars is always satisfying, briefly, viscerally, and without lasting consequence. So Nolan said nothing. He returned his gaze to the floor, resumed mopping. The arcs of the mop moved across the tile in the same steady rhythm, covering the space where Darren stood without pausing, without adjusting, without acknowledgement. Darren waited 3 seconds for a response, then 5, then 7. The silence expanded between them, filling the corridor with something that was heavier than words. "Well," Darren shifted his weight. "Good to have you back." He walked past Nolan and into the stairwell. The door closed behind him with a soft click. Nolan continued mopping. The floor did not care about the exchange. The tile did not know about leaked laptops and deleted texts and the specific kind of betrayal that wears a friendly face. The tile only knew the mop, and the mop only knew the floor, and the work only knew itself. That was the discipline, not the confrontation, not the accusation. The discipline of continuing to do honest work in a space contaminated by dishonest people, and trusting that the documentation, the process, the slow and frustrating and maddeningly imperfect machinery of institutional accountability would eventually reach the people the evidence pointed to, even the ones who brought donuts on Fridays. The floor did not know who was cleaning it. The tile did not care whether the man holding the mop was worth $400 million or $400, whether he owned the building or merely worked in it, whether his mother's name was etched in steel above the entrance or written in pencil on a timesheets that nobody archived. That was the point. That had always been the point. The floor needed cleaning. The work was honest. And Nolan Greer had promised his mother that no amount of success would make him forget what the mop handle felt like. He finished 22, moved to 21, then 20, then 19, then 18, 5 floors, cleaned with the same care, the same precision, the same attention to corners and baseboards, and the underside of conference tables where gum accumulated and nobody noticed except the person whose job it was to notice. At 10:40 p.m., he returned the cart to the basement staging area, signed the shift log at the security desk. The new security officer, a man named Gerald, polite, professional, no history of selective enforcement, glanced at the log and said, "Good night, Mr. Greer." Mr. Greer, not buddy, not pal, not old man, not you. Mr. Greer, spoken without emphasis, without ceremony, without the self-conscious weight of someone performing respect. Just a name, used correctly, in a lobby where names had not always been used correctly. "Good night, Gerald." Nolan walked through the revolving door. The Charlotte night was cool, mid-November, the kind of evening where breath fogs at the edges and the city lights blur against low clouds. He walked 3 blocks to the employee parking lot. The same lot. The same spot between the dumpster corral and the chain-link fence. The Honda waited where it always waited. He sat behind the wheel. Did not start the engine. Reached into his breast pocket and took out the photograph. Marion Greer, floral dress, smiling in front of a house she cleaned for 30 years. He held the photograph the way he always held it, with both hands, fingers at the edges, the way people hold things that are irreplaceable. "Still here, Mama," he said quietly. "Still cleaning." He started the engine, drove home on streets he had known for 40 years. Parked in his driveway, checked the lock twice, set his alarm for 5 a.m. On the kitchen table, next to his coffee mug and his car keys, sat an envelope that had not been there when he left for his shift. Plain white, no return address. His name typed on the front, not handwritten, typed, in a font that suggested a printer rather than a person. He opened it standing at the table, coat still on, boots still tied. Inside, a single sheet of paper. 3 sentences typed in 12-point font. The scholarship announcement made the news in Richmond. Something similar is happening at a Pinnacle office there. Is there anyone who can help? No signature, no name, no phone number. Just a postmark, Richmond, Virginia, and 3 sentences that carried the weight of a pattern larger than 1 building, 1 city, 1 man with a mop. Nolan set the letter on the table, sat down, looked at the kitchen drawer. Empty now, the leather folder gone, the brass clasp no longer there to touch like a talisman. Looked at the photographs on the living room wall. Marion in her work clothes, Marion with her bucket, Marion smiling, always smiling, even when the work was hard and the hours were long and the people whose houses she cleaned could not remember her last name. He picked up his phone, called Jerome. "It's Nolan. I got a letter. Richmond. Pinnacle's office there. Same pattern." He paused. "Can you look into it?" Jerome's voice came back steady, unsurprised. The tone of a man who understood that corruption was not a single event, but a culture, not an isolated incident, but a practice, not one building's problem, but a system's symptom. "I'll make some calls in the morning. If there's documentation, we'll find it." "Jerome." Nolan's voice softened. "The scholarship. The first applications. When do they open?" "January 15th. We've already received inquiries. 14 families so far. First-generation students, children of custodians, cafeteria workers, security staff, groundskeepers. Kids whose parents clean buildings they'll never own." A pause. "Your mother would be proud." "My mother would tell me to stop talking about it and go iron my uniform." Nolan almost smiled. "Good night, Jerome." "Good night, Nolan." The call ended. The kitchen was quiet. The refrigerator hummed. The neighbor's music pulsed faintly through the wall. The clock on the stove read 11:22 p.m. Nolan reread the letter from Richmond. 3 sentences. No signature. The handwriting on the envelope, his name, his address, had been typed, but the letter inside was printed on standard copy paper, the kind available in any office supply closet in any building in any city. The person who sent it had access to a printer, but not to courage sufficient for a signature, which meant they were still inside whatever was happening in Richmond, still working, still watching, still afraid of the same institutional machinery that had targeted Nolan in Charlotte, the inspections, the pocket searches, the supply closet lockouts, the friendly colleagues whose friendship served purposes the friend never intended. He thought about Odessa's notebook. about the moment she had started writing, not knowing where the notebook would travel, not knowing it would end up notarized in a lawyer's safe, not knowing it would become the foundation of a case that restructured a corporate tower's power dynamics. She had started writing because she saw something wrong and believed that writing it down was better than letting it disappear. Someone in Richmond had done the same thing, had seen a pattern, had recognized it, had read 6 paragraphs on page 7 of the Charlotte Observer, and understood that the pattern was not unique to one building, one city, one custodial worker named Nolan Greer. The pattern was larger, wider, the kind of thing that grows in the spaces between institutional oversight and institutional indifference, in the corridors where the people who clean up after power are invisible to the people who wield it. Nolan folded the letter and placed it in his breast pocket, next to the photograph of Marion, next to the space where the leather folder used to rest before it left the drawer and entered the world and changed the trajectory of a 32-story building and everyone in it. Some fights don't end. They just find new buildings, new corridors, new supply carts where evidence gets planted by friendly hands, new lobby desks where security supervisors decide who walks through the front and who goes around, new conference rooms where people with power look through the people who clean up after them, seeing uniforms instead of names, job titles instead of human beings, mop handles instead of the hands that hold them. The EEOC investigation would grind forward. 8 to 14 months of interviews, document requests, position statements, and the slow bureaucratic machinery that processes discrimination complaints in a country that generates them faster than any agency can review. Charge number 846-2024-03179 would sit in a queue alongside thousands of other charges, each one representing a person who had been treated as less than they were by an institution that should have known better. Meredith Thorne would negotiate her exit, sign her NDA, move to another city, another firm, another office where her management style would be described as direct and results-oriented rather than what Odessa's notebook had documented it to be. The system would recycle her. Systems always did. Darren Lowell would bring donuts on Friday, would smile at the new janitor the way he had smiled at Nolan, the warm, open, interested smile of a man whose friendship was inventory, whose questions were reconnaissance, whose loyalty extended exactly as far as the next text message to a contact saved under a single initial. And Nolan Greer would iron his uniform on Thursday evenings, polish his boots, drive to the employee lot 3 blocks from the Marion, walk through the front entrance at 6:01 p.m., push his cart to the service elevator, clean 5 floors with the care and precision of a man who understood that the distance between owning a building and cleaning it was not a contradiction. It was a promise made to a woman in a floral dress who never stopped smiling, even when the work was invisible and the dignity was hard won, and the people she served could not be bothered to learn her name. Her name was Marion. It was etched in steel above the lobby door. And her son, the janitor, the owner, the man they never bothered to see, would make sure it stayed there, bright and steady, against the Charlotte sky, for as long as the building stood.
Thank you for taking the time to watch this video today. If you found the content helpful, please remember to like and subscribe so you won't miss our upcoming episodes. If you have any questions or suggestions, feel free to leave a comment below. We are always here to listen.